Meanwhile, on the shores of La Florida, or Florida for you modern folk, in 1565, 56 years before the Pilgrims ever set foot on Plymouth Rock, Spanish settlers and Timucua natives shared America's first Thanksgiving feast. History books forgot it happened. Tonight, you'll remember. Welcome, friend. You've wandered into a story that was erased from American memory, a piece of history that almost no one learns in school. Tonight we're stepping back to September 8th, 1565, more than half a century before the Mayflower sailed, to experience the real first Thanksgiving on American soil. This isn't the Thanksgiving you know. There are no Pilgrims here, no Plymouth colony, no turkey and stuffing and pumpkin pie. Instead, there are Spanish colonists who've just survived a brutal Atlantic crossing, Timucua natives offering peace and provisions, a Catholic mass celebrated on a Florida beach, and a feast that history somehow forgot to remember. Why was this Thanksgiving erased? Perhaps because it was Catholic, not Protestant. Perhaps because it was Spanish, not English. Perhaps because it complicated the simple narrative that American students have been taught for generations. Whatever the reason, this first Thanksgiving disappeared from collective memory, buried under centuries of focus on the 1621 Plymouth celebration that came decades later. But it happened. It happened first, it happened here on these Florida shores, and the historical records prove it. Father Francisco López de Mendoza Grajales wrote about it in his diary. Spanish colonial documents recorded it. The indigenous Timucua people witnessed it. And tonight, you'll experience the quiet, unglamorous work that made it possible. The tedious unloading of ships, the exhausting preparation of food, the nervous first contact with native peoples, the simple joy of sharing a meal after months at sea. This is history for sleep, slow, detailed, methodical. We'll move through September 8th, 1565, hour by hour, task by task, experiencing the mundane labour that history books never mention. You'll haul supplies, inventory barrels, prepare fires, help cook the feast, and witness the moment when Spanish and Timucua first broke bread together in Thanksgiving. So before you settle in for this journey to forgotten 1565, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, so we can keep bringing you more erased stories from history's quiet corners. Let me know in the comments if you'd ever heard about this first Thanksgiving before. Most people haven't, and that's exactly why this story deserves to be told. Now get comfortable. Let the quiet hush of the room surround you, and allow the small, steady moments of America's erased first Thanksgiving to guide you gently toward rest. The morning of September 8th, 1565, begins in darkness aboard the San Pelayo, flagship of Admiral Pedro Menéndez de Avilés' expedition to La Florida. You've been awake for hours, sleeping on a ship's deck after weeks crossing the Atlantic means true rest is impossible. The wooden planks beneath you are salt-crusted and damp, worn smooth by countless sailors' feet over the years since this vessel was built in Spanish shipyards, somewhere along the coast of Andalusia. The planks have left their pattern pressed into your cheek and shoulder, a grid of lines that you can feel when you touch your face, evidence of another uncomfortable night at sea, spent lying on hard wood with only a thin blanket between you and the deck. This is a moment that history will forget. In 300 years, American schoolchildren will learn about Pilgrims and Plymouth, about 1621 and New England winters, about William Bradford and Squanto and the Wampanoag people, about a Thanksgiving that happened decades after this one. They won't learn about you, about this ship, about this September morning when Spanish colonists first set foot on the shore that will become St. Augustine, Florida, America's oldest permanent European settlement, still inhabited today, still thriving after more than 460 years of continuous occupation. But you don't know you're living through forgotten history. You only know you're exhausted, anxious and desperate to stand on ground that doesn't move beneath your feet. You only know that you've spent nearly 3 months aboard this ship, that you've eaten nothing but ship's biscuit and salt pork and occasional beans, that you've slept on hard deck and survived storms that threatened to send the fleet to the bottom of the Atlantic, that you've prayed more desperately than ever before in your life for safe arrival at this destination. You stand at the San Pelayo's rail, gripping the worn wood with both hands, watching the shoreline of La Florida emerge from pre-dawn greyness, like a slowly developing dream. The horizon is still dark, but there's enough light now to distinguish land from sea, to see the darker mass of coastline against the slightly lighter sky, to make out the general shape of beaches and forest and the inlet where the river meets the ocean. The sight of land, solid, unmoving land that promises an end to the constant pitching and rolling of sea voyage, makes your chest tighten with emotion that you don't quite have words for. Admiral Pedro Menendez de Avilés has been awake even longer than you, standing near the ship's bow with his officers, speaking in low voices that carry across the deck in the pre-dawn quiet. You can't hear specific words, but you can see their gestures, can sense the gravity of the discussion about the landing that will happen today, about the procedures and precautions necessary for a successful establishment of the colony, about the countless details that must be managed properly if this expedition is to succeed where so many previous Spanish attempts have failed. The Admiral is a man in his mid-40s, experienced in naval command and colonial administration, personally wealthy enough to have invested his own fortune in this expedition. He's been granted royal authority by King Philip II of Spain to establish Spanish presence in La Florida, to create a permanent settlement that will serve as a base for Spanish power in this region, to drive out the French Huguenots who've established their own settlement further north along the Florida coast, to convert the native peoples to Catholic Christianity, and to explore and exploit the natural resources of this territory. Failure is not an option he's willing to consider. Too much money has been spent, too many lives have been committed, too much depends on success. The fleet has travelled from Spain since late June, nearly 3 months of ocean crossing, with stops in the Caribbean for additional provisioning, for gathering intelligence about French activities in La Florida, for allowing ships to make minor repairs and crews to recover from the worst of the ocean voyage. The journey has been difficult but not disastrous by the standards of 16th century Atlantic crossings. Some storms that required days of terrifying struggle against winds and waves. Some sickness that claimed a few lives but didn't devastate the expedition. Some tension among the passengers and crew as different factions competed for influence and resources, but nothing that prevented the fleet from reaching this destination on schedule and relatively intact. The ships carry a diverse population intended to create a functioning colony rather than just a military outpost. There are soldiers, perhaps 500 of them, trained fighting men equipped with arquebuses and pikes and armour, ready to defend the settlement against threats from native peoples or from other European powers. There are settlers, families and individual men seeking land and opportunity in the New World, willing to gamble everything on the promise of a better life in Spanish Florida. There are priests, several of them led by Father Francisco López de Mendoza Grajales, whose mission is to establish Catholic worship in this new territory and to evangelize among the native peoples. There are craftsmen, carpenters and stonemasons and blacksmiths and bakers, men with specialized skills necessary for building a permanent settlement. And there are people like you, general labourers without specific military rank or specialised trade skills, brought along to provide the unglamorous work of hauling and digging and building that makes everything else possible. Everything depends on what happens today. Everything depends on a successful landing, on establishing a secure foothold on this shore, on beginning the work of settlement before the September weather turns dangerous with the hurricanes that can devastate coastal regions in late summer and autumn, before other European powers can interfere with Spanish plans, before disease or hunger or native hostility can destroy the expedition before it even properly begins. The air smells different here than it did in the open ocean, or even in the Caribbean ports where the fleet stopped for supplies and information. There's pine in the scent, sharp and resinous, the distinctive smell of pine forests that reminds you slightly of certain regions in Spain, but with a quality that's somehow different, somehow more intense and wild. Mixed with the pine is salt marsh, that particular combination of mud and salt water and decaying vegetation that characterises tidal zones, where fresh water meets salt water, where land transitions to sea in that liminal space that belongs fully to neither. And there's the humid thickness that characterises this latitude in September, the heavy moisture in the air that makes breathing feel like drinking, that promises brutal heat once the sun rises fully above the horizon. The temperature is already warm despite the early hour, despite the fact that the sun hasn't yet cleared the eastern horizon. Your shirt sticks to your back, damp with sweat even though you've done nothing more strenuous than stand at the rail and watch the shore. By midday, it will be brutally hot, the kind of heat that makes physical labour exhausting and dangerous, that can kill a man if he's not careful about staying hydrated and taking breaks in shade. But the landing must happen today. The Admiral has made this decision, and his decisions are not questioned by common colonists like yourself, who have no say in the expedition's management. Your belongings are few and simple, accumulated over a life that didn't include much material wealth or opportunity for accumulation. A spare shirt worn but clean, mended in several places where the fabric had torn during the voyage or during the hard years in Spain before you joined this expedition. A pair of breeches that have seen better days but are still serviceable, patched at the knee where they'd worn through, faded from their original brown to something closer to grey. A blanket, thin and rough but adequate for warmth on cool nights, purchased second-hand from a market in Cadiz just before the expedition departed. A wooden cup carved from a single piece of wood, smooth from years of use. A wooden bowl similarly carved, its interior stained dark from countless meals. A knife with a blade that's been sharpened so many times it's noticeably thinner than when it was new. The metal worn down by repeated honings, but still functional for cutting food, and rope, and the countless small tasks that require a blade. Everything is rolled into a canvas bundle that's been your pillow for months, wrapped tight and secured with rope, tied in the sailor's knot that you finally mastered after watching the crew tie and retie countless lines throughout the voyage. The knot is elegant in its simplicity, a series of loops and turns that create a bond secure enough that it won't come loose accidentally from ship motion or handling, but designed so that pulling the correct end of the rope releases everything immediately when needed. You've practiced this knot dozens of times during idle moments on the voyage, and now your fingers can tie it without conscious thought. The movement's automatic and sure, muscle memory developed through repetition. Other colonists are emerging onto the deck now, drawn by the same anticipation that's kept you awake, by the knowledge that today is the day they've been travelling toward for months, the day when the long voyage finally ends and the work of settlement finally begins. They move quietly in the pre-dawn darkness, speaking in hushed voices if they speak at all, gathering their own bundles, checking that everything is properly secured, preparing mentally for the transition from ship to shore, from the familiar routine of sea voyage to the unknown challenges of establishing a colony in unfamiliar territory. Most of these men are soldiers, trained fighting men who've been enlisted to defend the new settlement against whatever threats La Florida might present, whether from native peoples who might resent European intrusion into their territories, or from other European powers who might contest Spain's claim to this region, or from pirates and privateers who prey on colonial settlements and shipping. The soldiers wear varied equipment depending on their rank and role. Some have full metal breastplates and helmets, heavy armour that will be brutally hot in Florida's climate, but that provides real protection against arrows and spear thrusts. Others have lighter armour, quilted cotton jackets that offer some protection while allowing more mobility and comfort in hot weather. All carry weapons, arquebuses with their heavy barrels and slow-burning match cords, or pikes with their long wooden shafts and steel points, or swords of various designs hanging from belts. But there are also craftsmen visible among the emerging colonists, men whose hands show the particular calluses and scars of their trades, whose tools are wrapped carefully in their bundles, whose skills will be essential for transforming raw materials into the structures and goods that a settlement requires. You recognize a carpenter by the way he checks his carefully wrapped saws and chisels, a stonemason by the particular muscular build that comes from years of lifting and shaping heavy stone, a blacksmith by the burn scars on his forearms that marks someone who spent years working near forges and hot metal. There are a few families visible as well, though most are still below deck in the cramped quarters that have been their home during the voyage. You can see one man standing with his wife and 2 children, the whole family clutching their bundles, the children wide-eyed with a mixture of excitement and fear at the prospect of leaving the ship that's been their entire world for 3 months. The woman looks weary but determined. She didn't come all this way to fail now that land is finally within reach. The sky lightens gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, then more noticeably as dawn approaches. This process takes perhaps 30 minutes from the first faint lightening of the eastern horizon to the actual sunrise, and during this time more details of the coastline become visible with each passing minute. You can see where the land rises slightly from the water, forming low dunes covered with vegetation that waves gently in the morning breeze. You can see where vegetation grows dense and green, creating the maritime forest that backs the beach, a mix of pine trees and palm trees and other species you don't recognize from your experience in Spain. You can see where a river mouth creates an inlet, the darker water of the river mixing with the lighter salt water of the ocean, creating swirling patterns visible even from this distance, defining the harbour where the Spanish fleet will anchor and where boats will ferry people and supplies to shore. This must be the location the Admiral has chosen, the site where St. Augustine will be founded, though of course it has no name yet, no identity beyond being a promising stretch of beach on La Florida's northeastern coast, a place that offers good harbour and fresh water and defensible terrain, a place that seems suitable for establishing the permanent settlement that Spain needs in this region. The Spanish word Agustín refers to Saint Augustine of Hippo, the great Catholic theologian and church father whose writings have influenced Catholic theology for over 1,000 years, and whose feast day was celebrated just days ago on August 28th. The Admiral has chosen this name to honour the saint and to mark the religious significance of this founding. The settlement will be named San Agustin in Spanish, which English speakers will later anglicise to St. Augustine when the territory eventually comes under British and then American control. But that naming hasn't happened yet. Right now, this is just nameless beach, primitive and waiting, about to receive the European colonists who will transform it from wilderness to settlement, from native territory to Spanish possession, from unmarked shore to America's oldest city. Father Francisco López de Mendoza Grajales emerges from below deck, moving carefully on the steep stairs that are worn smooth and slippery from years of use, and from the constant dampness that affects everything aboard ship. He carries his vestments and portable altar carefully wrapped in protective oilcloth to keep them dry and clean, despite the ship's pervasive dampness that penetrates everything and causes mildew and rot if items aren't constantly maintained. He's a serious man, perhaps 40 years old, with the bearing of someone who takes his religious responsibilities with intense gravity, and who sees this expedition as not just a political or economic venture, but as a spiritual mission to plant Catholic faith in new soil. His face is weathered from weeks of sun exposure during the voyage, deeply tanned except for the lines around his eyes, where he squinted against bright sunlight, reflecting off water. He moves with the slight stiffness of someone who's been cramped in uncomfortable quarters for too long, his body protesting the months of limited space and awkward sleeping positions. But his eyes are bright with purpose and anticipation. This is the day he's been preparing for, the day when his mission truly begins. Father Lopez has maintained Catholic services throughout the voyage, despite the incredible challenges of conducting formal worship aboard a crowded, moving ship. Every Sunday, without fail, regardless of weather or sea conditions, he's conducted Mass on the main deck, leading prayers and scripture readings and offering the Eucharist to colonists who wanted to receive communion. The services have been abbreviated out of necessity, simplified to fit the circumstances, stripped of the elaborate ceremony that would characterize Mass in a proper cathedral. But he's insisted on maintaining the essential elements of Catholic worship: scripture readings from the Bible, prayers following traditional liturgical patterns, consecration of bread and wine that Catholic theology teaches transforms them into the literal body and blood of Christ, communion for the faithful who wish to receive this sacrament. His dedication has earned respect from even the roughest sailors and soldiers, men who might not be particularly devout in their personal lives, but who appreciate the chaplain's consistency and sincerity, who've drawn comfort from the regular rhythm of religious services during the uncertainty and danger of ocean crossing. Today will be special though. Today's Mass will be the first Catholic service celebrated on the soil of this new colony, a Mass of thanksgiving for safe arrival and divine protection during the dangerous crossing, a religious ceremony that will mark the spiritual founding of this settlement, just as the Admiral's formal declarations will mark its political founding. Father Lopez has been preparing for this moment throughout the voyage, planning the service carefully, selecting scripture readings that speak to themes of journey and arrival and divine providence. History will forget Father Lopez. His name will appear in some scholarly works, in specialized studies of Spanish colonial Florida, in occasional footnotes in broader histories. But most Americans will never hear of him, will never learn that he conducted America's first Thanksgiving Mass, will never read the diary entries he'll write about this day. His diary will survive in Spanish archives, carefully preserved documents written in elegant 16th century script, stored in temperature-controlled rooms in Seville, where researchers can request access. But few will make that request. Few will read his account. Few will learn what he witnessed and recorded with such care. The Mass he's about to celebrate will be erased from the national narrative, replaced in American memory by Protestant prayers at Plymouth Rock 56 years later. The feast he's about to bless will be forgotten, buried under stories about pilgrims and Turkey and the Thanksgiving that history chose to remember because it fit better with the Protestant, English-focused narrative that became dominant in American culture. But none of you know this yet. You only know that you've survived the ocean crossing, that land is finally within reach after months of uncertainty and danger, and that God's protection deserves acknowledgement and gratitude. The Admiral sees Father Lopez approaching and walks over to meet him, their conversation brief but significant. You're close enough to overhear their exchange. "Father, we'll land as soon as there's sufficient light to see the approach clearly and avoid any submerged hazards. I want Mass celebrated immediately upon landing. We give thanks to God before we begin any other work. First and foremost, we acknowledge that our success comes from divine providence, not from our own skill or strength." "I am ready, Admiral. It will be a humble service. We have no church building, no proper sanctuary. We'll celebrate Mass on the open beach with nothing but sand beneath us and sky above us. But surely God understands our circumstances and accepts our thanksgiving regardless of the setting. The gratitude in our hearts matters more than the grandeur of our surroundings. God brought us safely across the Atlantic, Father. He preserved us through storms that could have destroyed the entire fleet. He protected us from disease that often devastates ships during long voyages. He guided us to this harbour. He will certainly accept our thanksgiving wherever we offer it, whether in a magnificent cathedral in Seville or on a simple beach in La Florida. The exchange is practical and matter-of-fact, focused on logistics rather than flowery religious language. But there's something profound in it nonetheless. These men are about to plant the cross of Spain and the symbols of Catholic faith in soil that's never known European presence, in territory that's been inhabited by native peoples for thousands of years, but that has never heard Christian prayers or Catholic liturgy. Sailors are preparing the ship's boats now, working with practiced efficiency in the growing light. Now they check the ropes that hold the boats secured to the San Pelayo's sides, running their hands along the lines to feel for worn spots. They check the oars, examining each one for cracks or splits in the wood. They make ready to lower the boats to the water, a process that requires coordination and careful attention. The boats are sturdy but small, designed for ship-to-shore transport. Each boat is perhaps 15 feet long and 5 feet wide, constructed of heavy oak planks, sealed with tar to prevent leaking, equipped with 4 oars and simple wooden bench seats. The boats are capable of carrying perhaps 8 men, plus some cargo per trip, which means that with hundreds of people to land and tons of supplies to unload, this will take all day and probably continue into tomorrow. But it begins this morning, right now, in the growing light of September 8th, 1565, with the first boatload of men preparing to set foot on La Florida and begin the work of establishing what will become America's oldest permanent European settlement. You check your bundle one more time, the nervous gesture of someone who needs to occupy their hands with familiar action. Everything is secure. You've verified this repeatedly already, but checking again provides some small comfort, some sense of control in a situation where you actually have very little control over what happens next. Other colonists are performing similar nervous rituals, adjusting clothing unnecessarily, crossing themselves and murmuring prayers under their breath, pacing short distances back and forth on the crowded deck. Everyone understands that what happens next will shape the rest of their lives in ways they can't fully predict or control. The sun breaks the horizon, a brilliant disk of light that rises with surprising speed once it begins its ascent, sending golden light across the water in a shimmering path that seems to lead directly from the ship to the shore. The effect is beautiful, almost theatrical, as if nature itself is illuminating the path to this new beginning. The beach is fully visible now in the morning light, wide and sandy, perhaps 100 yards from the waterline to the tree line, backed by dunes and maritime forest, with the river inlet to the south, providing the natural harbour that the Admiral identified as perfect for the settlement's location. The beach looks peaceful, untouched, pristine, waiting to receive the Spanish colonists who are about to transform it from wilderness to settlement, from empty shore to the foundation of a town that will survive for centuries. First boat crew prepare to board, calls one of the officers, his voice carrying across the deck with practiced authority. Admiral and his staff, Father Lopez, senior officers, board quickly and efficiently. We have many trips to make today. This is it. The landing is beginning. History's being made, though of course you don't think of it in those terms. You're just a tired colonist who wants solid ground under his feet. But history is happening nonetheless. America's first Thanksgiving is about to begin, even though America as a nation won't exist for more than 200 years, even though this Thanksgiving will be mostly forgotten, while a later Thanksgiving at Plymouth will be remembered and celebrated. The morning continues to brighten, and La Florida waits to receive its newest inhabitants, colonists who don't know they're creating history that will be erased, who are simply trying to establish a settlement, survive in unfamiliar territory, and give thanks to God for safe arrival. The landing is beginning, and with it begins the story that most Americans will never learn. The first boat is lowered to the water with a splash that echoes across the quiet morning, ropes creaking through pulleys as sailors coordinate their efforts with practiced efficiency. The Admiral climbs down the rope ladder that hangs against the San Pelayo's hull, moving carefully, despite his age and dignity, his fine uniform somewhat incongruous as he performs this physical task that requires him to grip rough rope and feel for footholds on the swaying ladder. His officers follow one by one, each man making the careful descent from ship deck to boat, each one focused intently on not missing a rung or losing their grip, because a fall from this height into the water while wearing armour or heavy clothing could easily be fatal. Father Lopez is next, clutching his wrapped altar supplies carefully, taking his time on the ladder, obviously less comfortable with this physical challenge than the military men who preceded him. One of the sailors steadies the ladder from below, reaching up to help guide the priest's feet to the rungs, ensuring that Father Lopez makes the descent safely. The precious altar supplies, the vestments, the chalice, the portable altar table, the cross, are passed down separately to avoid risk of damage if the priest should slip. Several soldiers follow, heavily armed men whose weapons and armour make the descent more difficult. The boats sit low in the water, once loaded, and when the first boat pushes away from the ship's hull, when the oars bite into the water and the boat begins moving towards shore, you feel a pang of envy mixed with continued patience. You want to be on that boat, want to be part of the first landing, want to stand on solid ground as soon as possible. But your turn will come soon enough. You watch the first boat grow smaller against the expanse of beach and ocean. Watch as it reaches the shallows, where the water is light blue and clear. Watch as the occupants wade the final yards to dry sand. You see the Admiral step onto the beach, see him stand for a moment with his feet on solid ground, see him looking around with obvious satisfaction. You see Father Lopez follow, carrying his altar supplies, moving immediately to a spot that must have been designated in advance for the religious service. You see the soldiers spreading out, establishing a basic perimeter, scanning the tree line for any threats that might be concealed in the forest. More boats are prepared. The loading and launching process continues, each cycle taking perhaps 15 to 20 minutes from start to finish. The second boat takes more officers and soldiers. The third boat takes additional soldiers. The fourth boat takes the expedition's senior officials, the accountant, the treasurer, other administrative personnel, whose roles will be essential for managing the settlement's resources and keeping records that Spain requires for all colonial ventures. The morning progresses slowly for those still aboard ship. You occupy yourself by watching the landing operations, by counting boats as they come and go, by observing the gradual accumulation of people and early supplies on the beach. You can see the landing site becoming more organised with each passing hour, can see soldiers establishing a clear perimeter, can see supply crates being stacked in designated areas, can see Father Lopez setting up his altar in preparation for the Mass that will be celebrated once enough colonists are ashore to constitute a proper congregation. 4 hours have passed since the first boat departed, and you're still aboard the San Pelayo, still waiting your turn. The sun is well up now, climbing toward its midday peak, and the temperature is building steadily. Below deck, where you've been helping with inventory and supply organisation, the heat is oppressive, the air thick and still despite the open hatches. You're drenched with sweat, your shirt plastered to your back, your hair damp and dripping. You've spent the waiting time helping organise supplies for loading, work that's necessary but tedious. The cargo holds are cramped and dim, lit only by light filtering through hatches and by occasional lanterns that create small pools of illumination in the darkness. You've been sorting through barrels and crates, checking manifests against actual inventory, marking items for priority loading or for later shipment, essentially conducting the unglamorous inventory work that ensures nothing essential is left behind when the ship finally empties. The supply holds smell of wood and tar and salt, and the particular musty odour of spaces that have been enclosed for months, where air circulation is limited and dampness affects everything. Food stores occupy designated sections, barrels of salt pork that must weigh 200 pounds each when full, large ceramic containers of ship's biscuits stacked carefully to prevent breakage, sealed clay jars of olive oil that could split and spill if not handled properly. Heavy sacks of garbanzo beans that shift and settle during voyage and need to be checked for damage or pest infestation. Each barrel and crate and sack is marked with chalk numbers or painted symbols indicating contents and loading sequence. But 3 months at sea with constant ship motion has caused some disorganisation. Items have shifted, markings have been partially erased by moisture or rubbing, and some supplies have been moved from their original locations as the crew accessed items during the voyage. So verification is necessary. Actually, opening containers to confirm contents, comparing physical inventory against written manifests, making notes about discrepancies or damage. One has been working alongside you in the hold, and between tasks you've been talking intermittently. How much longer do you think before our turn? Another hour maybe. They're still loading soldiers mainly. Once the perimeter is fully secured, they'll start bringing general colonists like us. I'll be glad to get off this ship. 3 months is too long to be at sea. 3 months is nothing compared to some voyages. The ships that go to the Philippines can be at sea for a year or more. Then I'm grateful we only went to Florida. The conversation is minimal, but helps pass the time, provides some small sense of connection and shared experience in the midst of individual waiting. Finally, the call comes. Next group for shore loading. General colonists, gather at the starboard rail with your belongings. You grab your bundle and join the crowd of perhaps 30 colonists who've been waiting for this announcement. Everyone moves quickly, eager to finally leave the ship, eager to stand on ground that doesn't move. You make your way to the rail where boats are waiting, where sailors are organising the loading process with practiced efficiency. 8 passengers plus personal gear, announces the boat officer, the same instruction he's been giving all morning. No additional cargo this trip. Distribute yourselves evenly. Nobody stands up during the crossing. If you fall out, we'll probably fish you out. But let's not test that theory. You climb into the boat with 7 other colonists, finding a seat on the wooden bench that's already warm from sun exposure. Your bundle sits at your feet, everything you own in the world contained in that small canvas roll. The boat pushes away from the San Pelayo's hull, and you're finally heading toward shore. The rowing is smooth and purposeful, the 4 sailors working in synchronized rhythm that propels the boat steadily toward the beach. The distance that looked so short from the ship deck feels longer when you're actually crossing it, but gradually the shore grows closer, more detailed, more real. You can see individual people on the beach now, can distinguish soldiers from civilians, can see the altar that Father Lopez has set up in preparation for Mass. You can see supply stacks growing as more material is unloaded, can see the beginnings of organisation as the landing site transforms from empty beach to functional base camp. The boat's keel scrapes sand as you enter the shallows, and the sailors ship their oars. The water is perhaps knee-deep here, warm and clear, and you step over the side without hesitation. Your boots sink into wet sand, and the sensation of ground beneath your feet, ground that doesn't move, is so strange after months at sea that you stumble slightly. Juan, stepping out beside you, catches your elbow with a laugh. Land legs. Takes a while to adjust. You wade to dry sand, each step slightly awkward, as your body recalibrates its sense of balance for solid ground instead of moving deck. When you finally reach dry sand and stand still, you can feel the beach swaying slightly, except it's not the beach swaying. It's your inner ear still expecting motion, still compensating for ship movement that's no longer happening. Around you on the beach, recently landed colonists are experiencing the same disorientation. Some are walking in circles, deliberately practicing movement on solid ground. Others have simply sat down on the sand, waiting for the sensation to pass. A few look nauseous, their bodies confused by the transition from sea to land. But beyond the disorientation, beyond the adjustment required, there's profound relief. You're on land, solid, unmoving land. The voyage is over. The landing is accomplished. Whatever comes next, at least you're not on a ship anymore. You look around, taking in the landing site that will become America's oldest city. The beach stretches wide and welcoming, the sand white and hot under the climbing sun. The maritime forest beyond is dense and green, promising timber for construction and shade from the brutal heat. The river inlet sparkles in the sunlight, offering fresh water and access to the interior. The sky is brilliantly blue, cloudless and vast. This is La Florida. This is where St. Augustine will be founded. This is where America's first Thanksgiving will happen. And you're here, ready to begin whatever work is needed to make this settlement succeed. The transition from landing to organised work happens quickly, efficiently managed by experienced military leadership. Sergeant Cortés is standing near a makeshift command post consisting of a large wooden crate being used as a desk, with papers and lists weighted down by stones to prevent them from blowing away in the sea breeze. He's perhaps 50 years old, which makes him ancient by military standards, where most soldiers are dead or retired by 40. His face has been weathered by decades of sun and campaign experience, deeply lined and tanned to the colour of old leather. He's missing part of his left ear, some old battle wound that healed badly, and he moves with the slight limp of someone whose body has taken damage over years of service. But his eyes are sharp and his voice carries authority that comes from decades of commanding men in difficult circumstances. He sizes up your group of newly arrived colonists with practiced assessment, his gaze moving from person to person, noting apparent age and strength and any obvious skills or limitations. You can see him making quick judgments about who should be assigned to which tasks, categorizing men by their suitability for different types of labour. His eyes linger briefly on you, noting that you're young enough to handle physical work, strong enough for heavy labour, lacking any obvious disabilities that would limit your usefulness. You four, he says, pointing to a group that includes Juan, supply organisation. Report to Diego the clerk near those stacks of crates and barrels. He'll tell you what needs sorting, what needs to be inventoried, how everything should be arranged. Pay attention to his instructions. Proper organisation now will save confusion later. The four men nod and head toward where Diego is visible, already working with several other colonists to create orderly rows of supplies. You three, Sergeant Cortés continues, indicating another small group. Water detail. See those men carrying casks from the river? Join them. We need constant fresh water, for drinking, for cooking, for everything. It's hot work but essential. Pace yourselves and don't collapse from heat exhaustion. The three men acknowledge the assignment and move toward where a line of workers is visible, carrying water containers from the river to the main camp area. You, he points directly at you, cooking fires. We're having a feast today. Admiral's orders, Father Lopez's recommendation. Proper feast to celebrate safe arrival and to give thanks to God. That means fires need to be prepared properly. Report to Tomas near those pits they're starting to dig. A feast. The word registers with surprise and anticipation. After 3 months of ship's rations, salt pork barely softened by boiling, hard biscuit that required soaking to be chewable, occasional beans when the cooks had time for proper preparation, the prospect of an actual feast seems almost too good to believe. But you don't question orders. You just nod acknowledgement and head toward the area Sergeant Cortés indicated. The cooking area is being established near the tree line, positioned to take advantage of some natural wind protection from the forest while maintaining safe distance from the temporary shelters being constructed to reduce the risk of fire spreading if something goes wrong. Several men are already working on what appears to be initial fire pit preparation, digging in the sandy soil, discussing proper depth and dimensions. The lead cook, this must be Tomas, is a weather-beaten sailor who appears to be in his 40s, with arms that show the distinctive burn scars that come from years of working near fires and hot cooking surfaces. His face is reddened by constant heat exposure, and his eyebrows are singed and sparse from getting too close to flames too many times. But he moves with confident efficiency, clearly someone who knows his craft and takes pride in doing it well. "You here to help with fire preparation?" Tomas asks as you approach, not bothering with formal introductions or pleasantries. He's clearly focused on the task at hand, on the considerable work that needs to be accomplished before the feast can even begin. "Yes, Sergeant Cortez sent me." "Good. We need at least 6 proper cooking fires built before we can start food preparation. Maybe 8 if we want to have everything ready simultaneously. Large fires built to last all day and into evening. This isn't a quick meal for a small group. This is a feast meant to feed everyone. All the Spanish who've landed, plus native people if they accept the Admiral's invitation. That's several hundred people to feed properly." Several hundred people. The scope of the task becomes immediately clear. This isn't a simple meal for a small group. This is a major undertaking, requiring organisation and effort on a scale you haven't previously considered. "What needs doing first, you ask?" "Ready to begin whatever labour is required. Fire pits. We need them dug properly, deep enough to contain the fires and concentrate the heat, wide enough to accommodate large cooking pots and roasting spits lined with stones to protect the sand from dispersing into the food. Start by digging. Each pit should be roughly 3 feet across, about the span of a tall man's arms, and at least 1 foot deep, maybe 18 inches if you can manage it. Dig down until you hit packed sand or harder soil. The loose surface sand won't work because it'll keep collapsing back into the pit. You grab a shovel from the pile of tools that's been unloaded from the ships and head to a spot that Tomas indicates with a gesture, a section of beach that's been measured and marked with wooden stakes to show where the cooking area will be organised. The ground here is sandy, which should make digging easier than it would be in clay or rocky soil, though sandy soil also has the frustrating tendency to collapse back into holes as you dig them. The shovel is a simple tool, a flat iron blade attached to a wooden handle that's been worn smooth by countless hands over the years. The wood darkened by sweat and oil from all the workers who've used this tool before you. The blade shows signs of heavy use, with nicks along the cutting edge where it struck stones or roots and rust spots despite efforts to keep it oiled and maintained. But it's functional, adequate for the task even if it's not ideal, which is all you can really ask for in a colonial settlement where resources are limited and proper tools are precious. You position yourself over the marked spot and drive the shovel blade into the sand. It penetrates easily, sliding in with minimal resistance, and you lever up a shovelful of loose sand, tossing it aside to begin creating the pit. The work is straightforward but tedious. Bend, drive, shovel into sand, lift, toss, repeat. Over and over, gradually deepening the pit, constantly fighting the tendency of the loose sand to slide back into the depression you're creating. The September sun beats down without mercy. Within minutes, you're sweating heavily, the physical exertion and the heat combining to make the work exhausting, despite it being relatively early in the day. Your shirt sticks to your back, damp with perspiration that offers no cooling in the humid air. Salt from dried sweat starts to sting your eyes, and you have to pause periodically to wipe your face with your sleeve, which is equally damp and not particularly effective at clearing the sweat. But you continue working, establishing a rhythm that makes the labour more sustainable. Drive the shovel in, lift, toss the sand, repeat. Drive, lift, toss, drive, lift, toss. The repetitive motion becomes almost meditative, your mind able to wander while your body performs the familiar movements automatically. Around you, other workers are digging their own pits, each man bent to his task, each one creating the infrastructure for this evening's feast. Nobody talks much. The work is too demanding, the heat too intense for casual conversation. Occasionally, someone mutters a curse when the sand collapses, particularly badly, or when a shovel hits an unexpected root or rock buried in the sand. But mostly, there's just the sound of tools working, of sand being moved, of men breathing hard with physical effort. Juan is working on the pit next to yours, having apparently been reassigned from supply organisation to fire preparation. Between shovel loads, you exchange brief comments. They're really doing this feast today, on the same day we land? Apparently so. The Admiral must think it's important to establish this celebration immediately, to mark the founding with something special. Makes sense. Give thanks to God first, then worry about everything else. The conversation is minimal, just enough to provide some human connection without interfering with the sustained physical labour. After perhaps 30 minutes of steady digging, you estimate time by the sun's position, since you have no clock and no way to measure minutes precisely. Your pit is approaching the proper depth. The loose surface sand has given way to more packed material underneath, sand that's been compressed by the weight of the sand above it. That doesn't collapse as easily, but that's also harder to penetrate with the shovel. You're down about 15 inches now, which should be sufficient according to Tomas's instructions. You widen the pit slightly, making sure it's a proper circle, roughly 3 feet across, creating a space that will be large enough to contain a substantial cooking fire with room for pots and spits. Pit's ready for inspection, you call out, straightening up and stretching your back, which has begun to protest the constant bending and lifting. Tomas walks over, examines your work with a critical eye, checking the depth with a measuring stick, evaluating the width and shape. After a moment, he nods approval. Good depth, good shape, adequate width. The bottom is level, which will help with pot stability. Now we need to line it with stones. That'll help contain the heat, reflect it upward for better cooking efficiency, and keep the sand from getting into the food. See those men gathering stones from the beach and forest? Join them. We need flat stones if you can find them, but any reasonably sized stones will work. Aim for stones about the size of your fist or larger. Stone gathering means walking, which is actually a relief after the repetitive digging that's left your back and arms protesting. You head toward the beach where several workers are searching for suitable stones, examining pieces of rock and shell, selecting items that will work for lining the fire pits. The beach is scattered with stones of various sizes, most of them rounded smooth by wave action over years or decades or centuries of tumbling in the surf. The stones range from pebbles too small to be useful to large rocks, too heavy to lift. You need to find stones in that middle range, large enough to be structurally useful, but small enough that you can carry multiple stones per trip. You begin collecting suitable pieces, examining each potential stone briefly before deciding whether to keep it or discard it. Some stones are too rough, with sharp edges that would make them difficult to stack. Some are too rounded, so smooth that they'll roll and shift rather than staying in position. Some are too porous, the kind of stone that will crack and shatter when exposed to high heat. You're looking for dense, reasonably flat stones that will stack well and withstand the intense heat of cooking fires. You gather stones in your arms until you're carrying as much weight as you can manage comfortably, perhaps 30 or 40 pounds of rock. Then walk back to your pit and begin arranging them around the bottom and sides. The stones need to be positioned carefully, creating a stable layer that won't shift when the fire is burning, that will reflect heat upward effectively, that will protect the sandy bottom from direct contact with flames and coals. The stone lining process takes longer than you expected. Each stone needs to be placed with attention to how it fits with its neighbours, creating a relatively smooth surface rather than a chaotic jumble. You arrange stones, then rearrange them when they don't fit well, then adjust again to create the best possible configuration. Gradually, working methodically, you build up the lining until it's several layers deep on the bottom of the pit and rising perhaps 6 inches up the sides. The work continues through late morning into early afternoon. More trips to gather stones, more careful arrangement of each piece, more adjustment and refinement to create the best possible fire pit. Each trip to the beach means walking perhaps 50 yards, searching for stones, carrying weight back to the pit. Your arms grow tired from the carrying, your back aches from the constant bending, and you're desperately thirsty despite drinking from the communal water skin whenever you pass it. The sun climbs higher, the heat becomes more intense, and you find yourself wishing desperately for shade and rest. But the work must continue. The feast won't prepare itself, and these fires are essential infrastructure that must be completed before cooking can begin. Finally, after what feels like hours but is probably just 90 minutes or 2 hours at most, your pit is complete, properly dug, adequately lined with stones, ready to contain a cooking fire that will burn for hours. Tomás inspects it again, this time with a more thorough examination, checking the stone arrangement, testing the stability by pressing on various points, evaluating whether this pit will function properly when fire is actually burning in it. Acceptable work, he says after his inspection. This pit should serve well. Now we need fuel, vast quantities of wood for cooking fires that will burn all afternoon and evening. Dead wood only, and it needs to be reasonably dry. Green wood smokes too much and doesn't produce good cooking heat. Teams of 3 head into the forest, look for fallen branches, dead trees, anything that's been down long enough to dry, but not so long that it's rotted. Bring back everything you can carry and plan on making multiple trips. We'll need massive amounts of wood to keep 6 or 8 fires burning for hours. You team up with Juan and Rodrigo, a man who claims construction experience from Seville and who's been working on a nearby pit. And together, you head into the maritime forest that backs the beach. The transition from open beach to forest shade is immediately noticeable and intensely welcome. The temperature drops perhaps 10 degrees once you're under the tree canopy. The oppressive direct sun is blocked by leaves and branches, and suddenly breathing feels easier. The air is still humid, still thick with moisture, but the shade makes an enormous difference. The forest interior is beautiful in its way, though completely foreign to anyone familiar with Spanish landscapes. There are pine trees, yes, but mixed with palms and broadleaf trees you don't recognise from your experience in Spain. The understory is thick with vegetation, shrubs and vines and plants that seem to grow with wild abandon in the warm, humid climate that allows year-round growth rather than the seasonal dormancy that characterises Spanish winters. The forest is also loud with sounds that are completely unfamiliar and slightly unsettling. Birds call from invisible perches, their songs unlike any European birds, ranging from pleasant musical whistles to harsh caws to sounds that seem almost like human speech. Insects create a constant background hum, a chorus of buzzing and clicking and droning that's almost overwhelming in its intensity, louder than any insects you've ever heard in Spain. Somewhere in the distance, you hear what might be animal sounds, rustling in the undergrowth, branches moving, calls that could be from mammals or birds or creatures you can't even imagine. But there's work to do, so you focus on gathering wood rather than marvelling at or worrying about the unfamiliar environment. The forest floor is scattered with deadfall, branches that have fallen in storms, smaller trees that have died and toppled, substantial pieces of wood that appear reasonably dry and will burn well once added to cooking fires. You begin gathering suitable pieces, testing them for weight and dryness, loading your arms with as much as you can carry. Look for pieces about this long, Rodrigo says, holding his hands about 3 feet apart. Long enough to be useful for maintaining fires, short enough to carry easily, and make sure it's actually dead wood. See how this piece is grey and the bark is loose? That's properly dead. Green wood still has tight bark and shows some colour. The wood selection process requires judgment that you're developing as you go. Each piece must be evaluated, too heavy to carry or manageable, too rotten to burn properly or adequately preserved, long enough to be useful or too short to matter, dry enough to burn well or still too green despite being dead. You make these assessments quickly, selecting pieces that meet the requirements, rejecting pieces that don't. When your arms are full, when you're carrying perhaps 40 or 50 pounds of wood in an awkward, unbalanced load, you begin the walk back to the beach. The return journey is harder than the entry into the forest was, because now you're laden with weight, because the wood is awkward to carry with branches catching on vegetation and each other, because you have to navigate through the understory while keeping your balance and not dropping any of the carefully selected pieces. You emerge from the forest into the brutal sun, squinting against the sudden brightness after the relative dimness under the trees, and make your way to the cooking area where wood is being stacked in organised piles near each fire pit. You drop your load with relief, your arms burning from the sustained effort of carrying, your shoulders protesting the awkward weight distribution, and you take a moment to catch your breath before heading back for another load. The wood gathering continues for another hour at least, maybe longer. Trip after trip into the forest, selecting wood with increasingly tired judgment, carrying it back with increasingly exhausted arms, stacking it near the fire pits that are now all complete and ready for use. Each trip is essentially identical. Walk into forest, search for suitable wood, load yourself down with as much as you can carry, trudge back to the beach, dump the load, repeat. The repetition is mind-numbing, but the wood piles are growing steadily, and that visible progress provides some satisfaction. By early afternoon, the cooking area is finally ready. 6 fire pits are complete, properly dug and lined with stones and positioned for optimal cooking efficiency. Massive piles of firewood are stacked near each pit, enough fuel to keep the fires burning for hours of sustained cooking. The infrastructure is in place, waiting for the actual feast preparation to begin. You're exhausted, hands blistered from carrying rough wood, back aching from constant bending and lifting, desperately thirsty despite having drunk water whenever it was available. But the work is done, at least this phase of it. The foundation has been laid for the feast that will celebrate America's first Thanksgiving. Thomas surveys the prepared cooking area with satisfaction, walking from pit to pit, checking the work, nodding approval at what his team has accomplished. Good work, everyone. Better than I expected given how exhausted you all must be from the voyage and landing. Now take a break. Get water, find some shade, eat something if there's food available, rest for about an hour. We'll start the actual feast preparation after that, and that'll be even more work than what you've done so far. This was just the foundation. The real cooking labour comes next. You need no encouragement to rest. You find a spot in the shade at the forest edge, drop onto the soft ground with a groan of relief, and close your eyes for just a moment. Just a moment of rest before the next phase of work begins. Just a moment to recover slightly before the massive task of preparing food for hundreds of people begins in earnest. The afternoon is still young, and there's so much more work ahead. You're sitting in the shade with your back against a pine tree, drinking water from a shared skin that's being passed among the exhausted workers, when someone near the cooking area calls out in a voice that carries across the landing site, "Natives! Natives approaching from the forest!" The entire settlement operation pauses immediately. Every colonist stops what they're doing. Every hand pauses mid-task. Every conversation cuts off mid-sentence. All attention focuses on the tree line to the north, where several figures are emerging from the forest with slow, deliberate movements that suggest they want to be seen, that they're approaching openly rather than attempting to hide or surprise the Spanish. This is the moment when everything could go wrong. This is when peaceful landing could transform into violent conflict. When 3 months of voyage and all the effort of establishing this settlement could end in disaster because of a misunderstanding or a moment of panic or simple bad luck. Every Spanish colonist present knows the stories of previous expeditions to La Florida, knows that nearly all of them ended with conflict between Europeans and native peoples, knows that Spanish-native relations in other parts of the New World have often been characterized by violence and exploitation and mutual hostility. But the Timucua men who emerge from the forest don't appear immediately hostile. There are perhaps a dozen in this first group, and while they carry what appear to be fishing spears, long wooden shafts tipped with sharp points that could certainly be used as weapons, these spears are held casually, pointed at the ground, clearly tools for fishing rather than weapons prepared for combat. The men themselves are striking in appearance, tall and well-built, with athletic physiques that speak of active lives hunting and fishing and travelling through their territory. Their skin bears intricate patterns of tattoos, designs that cover arms and chests and faces in ways that are unlike anything you've seen in Europe or heard described from other parts of the New World. The tattoos appear to be created by some method that leaves permanent marks, designs that follow curves and lines with artistic precision, symbols whose meaning you can't begin to guess, but that clearly carry significance. They wear minimal clothing appropriate for the warm climate, simple breechcloths woven from plant fibres, perhaps some decorative items like shell necklaces or feather ornaments, but nothing like the elaborate clothing that Europeans wear even in hot weather. Their lack of clothing isn't due to poverty or primitiveness, you realise, but rather to practical adaptation to a climate where heavy clothing would be unnecessary and uncomfortable. These are people who've lived in this environment for countless generations, who understand its demands and opportunities far better than newly arrived Europeans ever could. The Timucua men move with easy confidence through the forest edge and onto the open beach, their bearing suggesting they're completely comfortable in this environment, that this is their territory in ways that the Spanish can never fully claim. They advance toward the Spanish settlement at a steady pace, not rushing aggressively, not creeping cautiously, just walking openly with the confidence of people who have nothing to fear and nothing to hide. Admiral Pedro Menendez de Aviles responds perfectly to the situation, demonstrating the diplomatic skill and political intelligence that made him one of Spain's most successful naval commanders and colonial administrators. He steps forward immediately, moving with deliberate calm toward the approaching Timucua, his hands deliberately visible and empty of weapons. He's wearing his full uniform, despite the heat, dark doublet with gold trim signifying his rank, proper breeches and boots, rather than casual shipboard clothing, and he presents himself clearly as the leader of this Spanish group, the person with authority to speak and negotiate on behalf of the entire expedition. His bearing is confident but not aggressive, commanding but not threatening. He walks without hesitation or fear, showing respect for the Timucua by approaching them directly rather than hiding behind soldiers, demonstrating that he takes this encounter seriously enough to engage personally rather than sending subordinates. One of the Timucua men steps forward from his group to meet the admiral, clearly their leader or spokesman based on how the others defer to him slightly, based on the additional decorative items he wears that might mark higher status, based on his confident bearing that suggests someone accustomed to speaking for his people. He's perhaps 40 years old, though it's difficult to judge age in people whose life experiences and diet and environmental exposure are so different from Europeans. His face bears extensive tattoo work that creates patterns around his eyes and across his cheeks, designs that might carry meaning about his identity or achievements or clan affiliations. The two leaders face each other across perhaps 10 yards of beach, European and indigenous, meeting for the first time, with everything hanging in the balance. The moment stretches, neither man speaking, both assessing the other, both making rapid judgments about intentions and trustworthiness, and the possibility of peaceful interaction. The assembled Spanish colonists watch anxiously, barely breathing, hoping desperately that this encounter doesn't trigger violence, that this settlement won't follow the pattern of so many failed Spanish expeditions before it. Admiral Menendez speaks first in Spanish, knowing full well that his words won't be understood as individual words, but trusting that tone and body language will communicate his peaceful intentions. We come in peace. We wish to be friends and neighbours to your people. We seek cooperation and mutual benefit, not conflict and hostility. The Spanish words hang in the air, meaningless as language to the Timucua leader, but delivered in a tone that's clearly peaceful. clearly friendly, clearly non-threatening. The Admiral's posture supports his words. He stands upright but relaxed, his arms slightly extended in a gesture that could be interpreted as openness or welcome or non-aggression, his face showing no hostility or fear, his entire bearing communicating peaceful intent through means that transcend language. The Timucua leader responds in his own language, words that are completely incomprehensible to Spanish ears, sounds and syllables that follow patterns nothing like Latin-derived languages, that use phonemes and intonations that European mouths struggle to reproduce, that rise and fall in rhythms that seem almost musical in their complexity. The language is rich with sounds that don't exist in Spanish, clicks and glottal stops and nasal vowels and tonal variations that carry meaning, but that Spanish speakers can't easily distinguish. But the tone of his response seems more curious than hostile, more questioning than threatening. He gestures toward the Spanish settlement as he speaks, toward the ships visible offshore, toward the boats ferrying supplies to the beach, clearly asking questions. Probably, "Who are you?" or "What are you doing here?" or "Why have you come to our land in these great floating houses?" Father Francisco López de Mendoza Grajales steps forward now, moving carefully to stand beside Admiral Menendez, positioning himself to be clearly visible to the Timucua without crowding the Admiral or seeming to take over the interaction. He's not wearing his full priestly vestments. Those are reserved for formal ceremonies like the Mass that will be celebrated later. But he's clearly identifiable as a religious figure by the simple cross he wears on a cord around his neck, and by his bearing that suggests someone who occupies a spiritual role rather than a military or political one. He carries a small wooden cross, perhaps a foot long, carved from a single piece of wood and polished smooth through years of handling. He holds the cross so the Timucua can see it clearly, his intent obvious even without words, to mark himself as a spiritual leader, to communicate through symbol even when language fails, to signal that the Spanish expedition includes religious dimensions that go beyond simple conquest or settlement. The Timucua men study Father López with evident interest, their gazes moving from the cross to his face, to his simple clothing, and back to the cross. The concept of a religious specialist, of someone dedicated specifically to spiritual matters rather than hunting or fighting or practical labour, appears to translate across cultures even when specific theological concepts don't. They may not understand Catholicism or Christianity or the cross as a symbol of Christ's crucifixion and humanity's redemption, but they seem to recognise that this man serves some sacred purpose, that he represents the spiritual dimension of the Spanish presence. "Interpreter," Admiral Menendez calls sharply, never taking his eyes off the Timucua leader. "Where is the interpreter? We need translation immediately. Someone bring Pedro here now." A Spanish soldier hurries forward, a man named Pedro Menendez, no relation to the Admiral, despite sharing a surname, a common occurrence in Spain, where certain surnames are extremely widespread, who supposedly learned some native language during a previous Spanish expedition to La Florida several years ago. Whether his language skills will actually be useful here, whether the language he learned is even the same one the Timucua speak, whether his vocabulary is adequate for serious diplomatic negotiation, all these questions remain to be seen. But he's the best option available, the only person in the expedition who has any hope of bridging the language gap beyond simple gestures and expressions. Pedro approaches nervously, clearly aware that everything depends on his ability to facilitate communication, that the success or failure of this first contact might hinge on his translation skills or lack thereof. He's perhaps 30 years old, with the weather-beaten face of someone who spent years in La Florida's climate. He begins attempting to communicate with the Timucua leader, using a mixture of words from what might be a related native language, gestures that attempt to convey meaning through action, and simple pointing to establish basic vocabulary and concepts. The process is slow and frustrating. with many misunderstandings and much repetition. Pedro speaks words that might or might not be comprehensible. The Timucua leader responds with words that Pedro obviously doesn't fully understand. And gradually, through trial and error and patient repetition, some level of mutual comprehension begins to emerge. It's not fluent translation by any standard. Meaning is lost constantly. Nuances disappear. Complex concepts get reduced to simple approximations. But it's something, a fragile bridge of communication that's better than nothing. Through the halting, imperfect translation that proceeds in fits and starts with many pauses for clarification, basic information begins to be exchanged. The Timucua leader's name translates as something like "he who watches the river," though the exact meaning is unclear, and Pedro admits that his translation might be imprecise. He indicates through words and gestures that his people have observed the Spanish arrival with great interest, that they've watched from the forest as the ships approached and boats began ferrying people to shore, that they've seen the Spanish begin establishing what appears to be a permanent settlement rather than just a temporary camp. His tone and body language suggest curiosity rather than alarm, interest rather than hostility. The Timucua have been watching, observing, discussing among themselves what these strange visitors might want, what their intentions might be, whether they represent a threat or an opportunity or something more complex. The appearance of so many people in such large boats is unprecedented in Timucua experience. They've heard stories from other tribes about Europeans visiting coastal areas, but this is the first time they've directly encountered such a large Spanish expedition. Admiral Menendez responds through Pedro's struggling translation, speaking slowly and clearly to give the interpreter the best chance of conveying his meaning. He explains that Spain, which he has to describe through elaborate gestures and analogies, since the concept of Spain as a distant European kingdom has no direct equivalent in Timucua experience, has sent colonists to establish a permanent settlement in La Florida. He speaks of King Philip II, though conveying the concept of a European monarch to people whose political organisation is probably based on village chiefs and regional alliances is challenging at best. He emphasises repeatedly, insistently, using every means of verbal and non-verbal communication available, that Spanish intentions are peaceful, that they seek cooperation rather than conflict, that they hope to be good neighbours to the Timucua people. How much of this complex political and diplomatic message actually translates successfully is impossible to know. Concepts like permanent settlement and peaceful coexistence and cooperation may have rough equivalents in Timucua language and thought, or they may not. The idea of Europeans claiming land that the Timucua have inhabited for generations beyond memory might be fundamentally incomprehensible or might seem so outrageous as to be laughable. But the basic message, we want peace not war, seems to come through clearly enough, repeated multiple times in multiple ways until even imperfect translation can't completely obscure the intent. The Timucua leader responds with what Pedro translates haltingly as something like, "Our village is not far from this place, perhaps 2 hours of walking through the forest following the river inland. Our people have lived in this land since the time before memory begins, since the first ancestors emerged into this world. We know this land intimately, its waters and seasons, its plants and animals, its gifts and dangers. You are strangers here, newcomers who don't know the ways of this place, but you come openly rather than trying to hide. You show signs of peaceful intent rather than preparing for immediate attack. So we will respond with peace rather than hostility. Perhaps we can help each other. We have fish from the rivers and ocean, corn from our gardens, knowledge of how to live in this land. You have things we have not seen before, metal tools that don't break or wear out like stone, cloth that looks softer than anything we can weave, objects whose purpose we don't understand, but that might be useful. Perhaps we can trade, learn from each other, find mutual benefit in cooperation. This response is remarkably positive, far better than the Spanish had any reasonable right to expect, given the history of European native relations in other parts of the New World. The fact that the Timucua are proposing trade and cooperation rather than demanding the Spanish leave immediately or threatening violence if they don't, this is almost miraculous, a diplomatic breakthrough that could mean the difference between settlement success and failure. Every Spaniard present understands that this peaceful beginning is an extraordinary gift, an opportunity that must be nurtured carefully to prevent it from dissolving into the conflict and hostility that characterized so many previous expeditions. Admiral Menendez seizes on this opening immediately, recognizing the political and practical opportunity it represents. Through Pedro's translation, speaking slowly and clearly to maximize the chance of accurate communication, he makes a bold proposal. We are celebrating today. We give thanks to our God for bringing us safely across the great ocean, for protecting us from storms that could have destroyed our ships, for guiding us to this good harbour, for delivering us safely to your shores. We are preparing a feast, much food, more food than a simple meal, food shared among all our people in celebration and thanksgiving. We would be greatly honoured if you and your people would join us, would share this meal with us, would eat together as friends and neighbours. There will be plenty, food from our ships that we brought from across the ocean, and we would welcome food from your fishing and your knowledge of this land's bounty. Let us break bread together. Let us share food as the beginning of friendship. Let us mark this day with hospitality that transcends the differences between our peoples. The invitation is bold and potentially risky, inviting unknown natives to participate in a celebration, to mingle freely with Spanish colonists, to share in what will be both a secular feast and a religious observance following Catholic Mass. There are countless ways this could go wrong. The Timucua might interpret the invitation as weakness, might see it as an opportunity to assess Spanish numbers and defences for possible later attack, might bring so many people that they outnumber and overwhelm the Spanish presence. But there are also ways it could go very right, ways it could establish the foundation for peaceful coexistence that previous Spanish settlements failed to achieve, ways it could create bonds of mutual obligation and friendship that will make future cooperation more likely. The Timucua leader considers the invitation carefully, conferring briefly with the other men in his group, speaking rapidly in their own language while the Spanish wait anxiously and try not to show their nervousness. The conversation among the Timucua seems animated but not hostile, with gestures and tone that suggest they're weighing options carefully, discussing possibilities and risks, trying to decide how to respond to these strange visitors and their unexpected invitation. You're too far away to hear specific words, even if you could understand the language, but you can see the body language and can sense the tenor of the discussion. Some of the Timucua men seem enthusiastic about the invitation, gesturing toward the Spanish settlement with evident curiosity. Others seem more cautious, their postures suggesting wariness, if not outright suspicion. The leader listens to various speakers, occasionally asking questions or making comments, clearly gathering input before making a decision that will affect his entire people's relationship with these new European neighbours. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, but is probably only 2 or 3 minutes, he who watches the river turns back to Admiral Menendez and through Pedro's translation responds, "We accept your invitation. We will return to our village and tell our people about your feast. We will bring fish from our waters, corn from our gardens, other foods to share at this celebration. We will see if Spanish and Timucua can truly be friends, if your words of peace match your actions, if you are truly peaceful as you say, if your intentions are good as you claim, then we will be peaceful also. We will see if strangers can become neighbours." The acceptance creates a wave of relief that sweeps through the Spanish colonists, like a physical force. You can feel the collective tension release, can see shoulders relax and postures soften, can hear the exhaled breaths of men who are preparing for possible violence and are profoundly grateful that violence didn't materialize. Soldiers who'd been subtly positioning themselves for potential combat, shifting weight to be ready to reach for weapons, angling their bodies to protect vulnerable areas, preparing mentally for fighting, now visibly relax, their relief obvious in every line of their bodies. But the Timucua haven't left yet. Several of them gesture toward the forest and begin speaking to their leader, clearly discussing logistics. He who watches the river nods and addresses Admiral Menendez again, through Pedro. Some of our men will return to the village to bring food and to tell others about your invitation. Some will remain here to learn more about you, to see your camp, to begin understanding who you are and what you intend. Is this acceptable? More than acceptable, Admiral Menendez responds quickly. We welcome those who wish to stay. Let them see our camp, observe our work, ask questions. We hide nothing. Transparency builds trust between peoples. About half the Timucua men, perhaps 6 or 7 of them, disappear back into the forest, moving with the easy confidence of people in their native territory, vanishing among the trees with barely a sound. The others remain at the landing site, and their presence immediately becomes a source of fascination for Spanish colonists who've never seen native peoples of La Florida before. The Timucua who remain seem particularly interested in the metal tools the Spanish are using. They approach slowly, cautiously, their eyes drawn to the iron and steel implements that are completely foreign to their experience. One man edges toward a shovel that's been left leaning against a crate, reaching out hesitantly to touch the metal blade with evident fascination. The Spanish worker who owns the shovel doesn't interfere, understanding instinctively that this curiosity is part of establishing peaceful relations, that allowing the Timucua to examine Spanish technology demonstrates trust and openness. The Timucua man runs his fingers over the iron blade, testing its hardness, examining how it's attached to the wooden handle, clearly trying to understand how such an object is made. He picks up the shovel carefully, asking permission from the Spanish worker through gesture, receiving a nod of approval, and hefts it experimentally, feeling the weight distribution, examining how it would be used. He seems amazed by the solidity of the metal, by its resistance to bending or breaking, by its sharp cutting edge that maintains its keenness far longer than stone tools ever could. Other Timucua are examining other Spanish items, looking at the boats pulled up on the beach, studying the construction and wondering how such large vessels are made. They observe the supply crates and barrels being unloaded, clearly puzzled by the quantity of goods the Spanish have brought. They watch ongoing work with interest, seeing soldiers establish the perimeter, seeing colonists organize supplies, seeing the entire operation of setting up a settlement from scratch. The Timucua also seem interested in Spanish clothing, which must seem bizarre and impractical to people adapted to this climate. They examine fabric when colonists allow it, touching the woven cloth with curiosity, clearly comparing it to their own fibre-based textiles. They're particularly interested in leather boots and shoes. The concept of enclosing feet in stiff protective coverings must seem strange to people who've always gone barefoot and whose feet have developed thick calluses that provide natural protection. This mutual observation, this careful examination of each other's material, culture and technology is as significant as the diplomatic words exchanged between leaders. Both groups are learning, gathering information, trying to understand who these others are and how they live. The Timucua are assessing Spanish capabilities and intentions. The Spanish are learning about native peoples they'll need to coexist with. All of it is building toward the feast that will come later, building toward the shared Thanksgiving that history will mostly forget. About an hour and a half passes in this way. Timucua observing Spanish work, Spanish trying not to stare too obviously at native peoples they've never encountered before. Both groups gradually becoming more comfortable in each other's presence. The initial tension eases as it becomes clear that neither side intends immediate violence, that both are willing to attempt peaceful coexistence, at least for today. Then the Timucua, who left, return, emerging from the forest carrying baskets. The baskets themselves are impressive, woven from some plant material you don't recognize, tight enough to hold contents without spillage, shaped efficiently for carrying. The Timucua craftsmanship is evident in how well these baskets are made, how smoothly the fibers are woven together, how the handles are positioned for optimal weight distribution. And the contents of the baskets are equally impressive. Fresh fish of multiple species, all caught this morning and still glistening with moisture. Some are as long as your forearm, thick-bodied species that must weigh several pounds each. Others are smaller but numerous, probably easier to catch in quantity. All look fresh and healthy, clear evidence that the Timucua are skilled fishermen who understand their waters intimately. There's also corn, not dried corn stored from previous harvests, but fresh ears still in their green husks, recently picked from gardens, representing the current growing season's abundance. The corn looks different from European varieties you've seen. The ears perhaps smaller, but densely packed with kernels. Squash of various types fill another basket, strange varieties you don't recognize from Spanish agriculture. Some round and some elongated, some with smooth skin, and others warty or ridged. These too appear recently harvested, fresh from Timucua gardens. Some kind of roots or tubers occupy another basket, looking like nothing you've ever seen in Europe. They might be some form of edible root crop, something the Timucua cultivate or gather from wild plants. And in a final basket, what appear to be wild berries, perhaps gathered from forest plants that are currently fruiting. The bounty is impressive and speaks to sophisticated knowledge of local resources, to successful agriculture that provides reliable harvests, to hunting and gathering skills that supplement cultivated crops. These are not primitive people struggling to survive. These are people who live comfortably in this environment, who've developed technologies and practices that work extremely well for their circumstances. Tomas the cook sees the Timucua approaching with their food contributions and hurries over, his professional interest immediately engaged by the variety and quality of the provisions. Through Pedro's translation, he begins examining the offerings, asking questions about how these items are typically prepared, trying to learn as much as possible about Timucua cooking methods that might improve the feast being prepared. The Timucua are willing to share their knowledge. Several women have appeared now. They must have come with the men who returned from the village, though you didn't notice them at first. Their presence is significant. In many cultures, women don't accompany war parties or dangerous diplomatic missions, so their appearance suggests the Timucua truly do consider this a peaceful gathering rather than a potentially hostile encounter. The Timucua women begin demonstrating cooking techniques, using gestures and the limited translation Pedro can provide to convey information. They show how they wrap fish in large leaves, pointing to specific plants visible at the forest edge, before placing the wrapped fish on coals to cook. The leaves apparently protect the fish from direct contact with ash, while allowing heat to cook it through, and also impart flavours that season the fish in ways that Spanish methods don't achieve. They demonstrate how they roast corn while still in its husk, showing where to place the ears relative to the fire, how to judge proper cooking time, how to turn them for even heat exposure. The husks protect the kernels while allowing the heat to penetrate and cook the corn, keeping it moist and preventing burning. They explain through gesture and demonstration how they prepare squash. Some types are roasted directly on coals, some are boiled in water, some are cut and cooked in ways that the language barrier makes difficult to understand, but that clearly work based on the confidence with which the Timucua present these methods. This cultural exchange, this sharing of knowledge and techniques across cultures, is as significant as the political agreement to be peaceful. peaceful neighbours. Food is universal. Cooking methods transcend language barriers, and the willingness to teach and learn suggests genuine openness on both sides, rather than merely polite tolerance. The Timucua could have simply brought food as a gift without explaining their methods. The Spanish could have accepted the food without showing interest in native techniques. But both groups are actively engaging, trying to learn from each other, demonstrating mutual respect through this exchange of practical knowledge. Admiral Menendez watches this interaction with obvious satisfaction, understanding as any good leader must that building peace requires more than just diplomatic words. It requires practical cooperation, shared interests, human connections that create bonds of mutual obligation and respect. The Timucua teaching, Spanish cooks their methods, the Spanish showing interest and appreciation for native knowledge, Spanish demonstrating their own tools and technologies that might benefit the Timucua. This is how peaceful coexistence begins, not through grand declarations but through small acts of practical cooperation and mutual aid. Father Lopez observes everything with the careful attention of someone who's not just watching politics unfold, but who's witnessing something spiritually significant. He's clearly moved by this peaceful encounter, seeing in it the possibility that Spanish settlement can be different here than it's been in other parts of the New World, that cooperation with native peoples might actually be possible if both sides approach the relationship with good faith and mutual respect. In his diary tonight, he'll write extensively about this meeting, about the Timucua's peaceful approach, about the shared feast that's being prepared, about his hope that these native peoples might eventually embrace Catholic faith through persuasion and example, rather than through force or coercion. His account will survive in Spanish archives for centuries, preserved for any scholars who care to read it, but it will remain mostly unknown to the American public that focuses on Plymouth instead. But that forgetting hasn't happened yet. Right now, this is just history unfolding moment by moment, as Spanish colonists and Timucua natives begin the process of becoming neighbours, of learning to coexist peacefully in this shared territory, of creating relationships that will shape the settlement's success or failure in the months and years ahead. The feast preparation enters its next, more intensive phase now, with Timucua contributions to incorporate, with indigenous knowledge to apply alongside European methods, with the promise that this celebration will truly be a shared Thanksgiving between peoples rather than just a Spanish event that natives observe from a distance. The food preparation for America's first Thanksgiving feast begins in earnest during the early afternoon as the sun climbs toward its peak and the settlement becomes a centre of coordinated activity. Tomas, the cook, has organised his expanded team, now including both Spanish workers and Timucua guides who'll help with indigenous preparation methods. With military precision, assigning specific tasks to specific workers, establishing a timeline for when each element of the feast must be ready, ensuring that everything will come together simultaneously for the celebration planned for late afternoon following Father Lopez's Mass of Thanksgiving. You're assigned to help with the salt pork preparation, which turns out to be far more complex and time-consuming than you anticipated. The salt pork that's been stored in barrels for months requires extensive, multi-stage preparation before it can be served in any form that's palatable to human consumption, and this preparation will consume hours of labour before the meat is even ready to begin actual cooking. The salt pork preparation is a multi-stage process that will consume hours of careful labour. The meat has been packed in heavy brine, essentially buried in salt, to preserve it during the long voyage from Spain, and while this preservation method works extremely well at preventing spoilage, it also makes the meat nearly inedible without proper preparation that draws out the excess salt while preserving enough to provide flavour. The first step is removing the pork from its storage barrels, which proves to be more difficult than you expected. Each barrel contains perhaps 50 pounds of pork chunks packed tightly in concentrated brine that's become thick and almost syrupy during the months of preservation. The barrels themselves are heavy oak constructions, sealed with wooden lids that have been hammered tight to prevent any leakage during the sea voyage. Prying these lids open requires two men working together, one to stabilise the barrel and prevent it from tipping, another to work a metal pry bar under the lid's edge and lever it upward with sustained pressure. You and another worker named Miguel position yourselves at the first barrel. Miguel grips the barrel firmly, his arms wrapped around it to hold it steady against the rocking that will occur when you start prying at the lid. You insert the pry bar, a flat iron tool, perhaps 2 feet long, with one end shaped into a wedge, under the lid's edge, working it carefully into the narrow gap between lid and barrel rim. The wood is swollen from months of exposure to the brine, making the gap almost non-existent, and you have to tap the pry bar gently with a mallet to work it into position. Once the bar is properly positioned, you begin applying leverage, pulling down on the long end to force the wedge upward against the lid. The wood resists, the seal having become almost welded together by time and moisture. You increase the pressure gradually, feeling the wood begin to give slightly, hearing small creaking sounds as the fibres start to separate. More pressure, and suddenly the lid releases with a sharp crack, one edge lifting free while the rest remains sealed. You reposition the pry bar to work on another section of the lid, repeating the process. Each section of the lid must be freed individually before the whole lid can be removed. The work is slow and requires patience. Rushing would risk splitting the wood or even breaking the pry bar, and both barrels and tools are too precious to waste through carelessness. After perhaps 10 minutes of careful work, the lid finally comes free completely. The smell that emerges from the barrel is powerful, intensely salty, somewhat pungent, the concentrated aroma of meat that's been packed in brine for months. It's not a bad smell exactly, not the smell of spoilage or rot, but it's strong enough to make your eyes water slightly and to trigger an immediate awareness of just how much salt has permeated this meat. The pork chunks themselves are visible now, packed tightly in the dark brine that fills the barrel almost to the top. Each chunk is perhaps the size of your fist, rough-cut pieces of pork that include both lean meat and fat in varying proportions. The meat has turned greyish-brown from the brine, and the surface of each chunk is crusted with visible salt crystals that sparkle slightly in the sunlight. Extracting the pork from the barrel requires reaching into the cold brine, cold despite the warm weather because the salt water has been protected from sun by the wooden barrel. You reach in carefully, your hands immediately feeling the sting of the concentrated salt solution on any small cuts or scratches. The brine is thick, almost viscous, and your hands disappear into the murky liquid as you feel around for individual chunks of meat. You grasp a chunk and lift it out, the brine streaming off in thick rivulets. The meat is heavy with absorbed liquid, probably weighing half again what it would weigh dry. You place it in a large wooden bucket that's been positioned nearby for this purpose, then reach in for another chunk, and another, and another. The process is repetitive and somewhat unpleasant. The cold brine makes your hands ache after a while, and the salt begins to dry your skin, creating a tight, uncomfortable feeling. Chunk after chunk comes out of the barrel. You work methodically, trying not to think about how many more chunks remain, just focusing on the immediate task of extraction. After perhaps 20 chunks, your hands are getting numb from the cold brine. You pause to dry them on a cloth and let them warm up slightly before continuing. Miguel takes over the extraction while you rest your hands, and you switch roles. Now you're holding the barrel steady while he reaches into the brine. The work continues, chunk after chunk, until the bucket is full and needs to be carried to the next stage of preparation. You heft the heavy bucket. It must weigh 40 pounds or more, and carry it carefully to where large pots of fresh water have been set up for the soaking process. This first barrel yields perhaps 60 chunks of salt pork, enough for maybe 40 or 50 servings once it's properly prepared and cooked. Tomas has calculated that the feast will need to feed at least 300 people, all the Spanish colonists who've landed, plus the Timucua guests who've accepted the invitation, which means multiple barrels of salt pork will need to be processed. This is just the beginning. The soaking process requires enormous quantities of fresh water, which means the water-carrying crew has been working constantly to keep the large pots filled. Each pot holds perhaps 10 gallons of water and can accommodate chunks from approximately 1 barrel of pork. The chunks go into the water-filled pots, sinking to the bottom, beginning the long process of osmosis that will draw excess salt out of the meat and into the surrounding water. This water will need to be changed every 2 hours, Thomas explains, as you add chunks to the first soaking pot. The water draws out the salt, but once the water becomes saturated with salt, the process stops. Fresh water must be added regularly to continue drawing out the excess. By evening, after 6 hours of soaking with 3 water changes, the pork should be edible. Not ideal, it'll still be saltier than fresh pork, but acceptable for a feast. 6 hours of soaking, 3 water changes. Each water change means dumping heavy pots of salt-contaminated water and refilling with fresh water from the river. The scope of the labour becomes even clearer. You return to the barrels to continue extraction. The second barrel opens more easily than the first, either because you've learned the technique or because this particular barrel wasn't sealed quite as tightly. The same process repeats. Reach into the brine, extract chunks, place in bucket, carry to soaking pots. Your hands are getting progressively more raw from the salt exposure, the skin beginning to crack slightly in places where it's dried out too much. After the second barrel is emptied, Thomas calls for a brief break. You're grateful for the rest, for the chance to properly dry and warm your hands, to drink some water and recover slightly before continuing. Other workers are engaged in parallel tasks throughout the cooking area. The fish preparation has become a small industry of its own, with both Spanish cooks and Timucua women working together to clean and prepare the various species that were brought. Each fish must be individually scaled, a tedious process of scraping the scales off using the edge of a knife or a specialised scaling tool, working from tail toward head, making sure to remove all the scales without damaging the flesh underneath. You watch one of the Timucua women demonstrating the proper technique for cleaning a large fish. She holds it firmly with one hand, the fish's belly facing upward, and with a shell tool that serves as her knife, she makes a precise cut from the anus forward toward the gills, opening the belly cavity in one smooth motion. Then she reaches inside and scoops out the internal organs, guts, swim bladder, everything that's not edible, disposing of them in a waste pit that's been dug specifically for fish offal. The precision of her movements is remarkable. She's clearly done this thousands of times, her hands knowing exactly where to cut, exactly how deep to go, exactly what to remove and what to preserve. The whole process takes her perhaps 30 seconds per fish, and she moves immediately to the next one. Her efficiency making the Spanish cooks look clumsy by comparison. A Spanish cook attempts to replicate her technique on the next fish. His movements are slower, more hesitant, less confident. He makes the belly cut but goes too deep, nicking the intestines and releasing some of their contents into the body cavity. The Timucua woman makes a soft sound, not quite disapproval, but something close to it, and demonstrates again, this time more slowly, showing exactly how shallow the cut should be, how to angle the knife to avoid damaging the organs until you're ready to remove them. The Spanish cook tries again on another fish, and this time his technique is better. Still not as smooth as the Timucua woman's, but acceptable. Practice will improve his skill, but for now, the Timucua women are far more efficient at this task than the Spanish cooks attempting to learn. Pile after pile of cleaned fish accumulates on wooden boards that serve as preparation surfaces. Some fish are being prepared for Spanish-style cooking, split open, perhaps salted lightly, ready to be grilled on improvised grates over the cooking fires. Others are being prepared according to Timucua methods, wrapped in large leaves that the Timucua women collected from plants at the forest edge, ready to be placed directly on hot coals, where the leaves will protect the fish while allowing heat to cook it through. The corn preparation is happening simultaneously in another area of the cooking zone. The fresh corn brought by the Timucua is being roasted according to their traditional method, which involves keeping the ears in their husks and placing them directly in or near the cooking fires. The Timucua women are demonstrating the proper placement, not directly in the flames where they would burn, but positioned around the fire where they'll receive intense radiant heat without actual flame contact. The husk turns black, one of the Timucua women explains through Pedro's translation, but inside the corn steams and becomes sweet. You must turn the ears regularly, every few minutes, so all sides cook evenly. When the husk is completely black and starting to fall away, the corn is ready. The Timucua demonstrate this by placing several ears around one of the fires, positioning them carefully in the optimal heat zone. Then they show how to use a stick to roll the ears periodically, turning them to expose different sides to the heat. The process looks simple, but clearly requires judgment and attention. Too close to the fire, and the ears will burn before cooking through. Too far away, and they'll take forever to cook properly. Spanish workers are assigned to tend the roasting corn, watching multiple ears simultaneously, turning them at appropriate intervals, monitoring the progress of the blackening husks. It's hot work, requiring standing close to the fires in the afternoon heat, and the workers quickly become sweat-drenched. But the work continues because the feast must be ready on schedule. The garbanzo beans require their own extended preparation process. These dried legumes have been stored in sacks since the expedition left Spain, and before they can be cooked, they must be sorted to remove any stones or debris that might have gotten mixed in during harvesting or storage. This sorting is tedious, mind-numbing work that must nonetheless be done carefully to prevent anyone from breaking a tooth on a piece of gravel. You're reassigned to bean sorting after completing the third barrel of salt pork extraction. Your hands need a break from the brine, and bean sorting is less physically demanding, even if it's mentally draining. You join 3 other workers who are seated on the ground with large wooden boards in front of them, working through the beans handful by handful. The technique is simple, but requires attention. Pour a pile of beans onto your board, spread them out into a single layer. Pick through them one by one, examining each bean, removing anything that's not actually a bean. The foreign matter you find includes small stones, bits of dried plant material, occasionally a bean that's too damaged or discoloured to use. Once even a small piece of what might be dried insect. Everything non-bean goes into a discard pile. The beans themselves are small and round, a pale tan colour, hard as pebbles from drying. Each handful contains maybe 50 or 60 beans, and each bean must be individually examined. The work is slow. You can maybe process 5 or 6 handfuls per hour, which means several hours of work to sort enough beans for a feast serving 300 people. Your mind wanders as your hands work automatically through the beans. The afternoon heat becomes oppressive, even sitting in the shade. Sweat drips steadily, making the work uncomfortable, despite it being less physically demanding than hauling water or digging fire pits. Your back aches from sitting in the same position. Your eyes start to blur from staring at small beans for extended periods. But the work continues because it must, because every task matters, because the feast depends on hundreds of small labours being completed properly. After perhaps 2 hours of steady sorting, Tomás calls for another water change on the soaking salt pork. This means organised chaos as multiple workers coordinate to dump the salt-saturated water and refill the pots with fresh water from the river. The pots are far too heavy to lift when full, so the process involves tipping them carefully to pour out the water, trying not to lose any of the pork chunks in the process, then refilling bucket by bucket with fresh water carried from the river. You're assigned to the river carrying crew for this water change, which means multiple trips hauling heavy water buckets from the river to the cooking area. Each pot requires perhaps 15 buckets to refill, and there are 6 pots that need refilling. The math is daunting. 90 trips from river to cooking area, each trip carrying 40 pounds of water in the afternoon heat. You fill your 2 buckets at the river, lifting them with a grunt of effort, and begin the walk back. The path is well worn now from constant traffic, but it's still uneven and sandy, and each step requires attention to avoid stumbling and spilling the precious water. The buckets slosh with every movement, water splashing against the sides, some inevitably spilling despite your best efforts to walk smoothly. By the 5th trip, your arms are burning with fatigue. By the 10th trip, you're moving on sheer determination. The water changes are finally complete. The salt pork continues its slow process of desalination, and you're allowed another brief rest before the next round of tasks begins. The sun is beginning its descent toward the western horizon now, painting the sky in the first hints of orange and gold that promise a beautiful evening. The feast preparations are reaching their final, most intensive phase. The salt pork has been soaking for hours and should be ready for cooking soon. The fish are all cleaned and prepared, ready for their various cooking methods. The corn is roasting steadily, the blackened husks indicating that the cooking process is working as intended. The beans have been sorted and are now simmering in large pots, slowly softening from hard dried legumes into edible food. The Spanish bakers have been working in parallel throughout the afternoon, constructing makeshift ovens from stones and clay and producing actual bread, the first real bread since leaving Spain months ago. The smell of baking bread drifts across the cooking area, tantalizing and wonderful, making your empty stomach cramp with anticipation. The bread won't be fancy, just simple loaves made from flour and water and salt, shaped by hand and baked in rough stone ovens that barely deserve the name. But after months of ship's biscuit that was harder than wood and tasteless as sawdust, even simple bread seems like the finest delicacy imaginable. Tomás walks through the cooking area, checking on each element of the feast preparation, evaluating progress, adjusting assignments to ensure everything will be ready simultaneously. He pauses at the salt pork pots, testing a small piece of meat to assess how much salt has been drawn out. He makes a face, still too salty, needs more time, and orders the pots to be left for another hour before the final preparation begins. He checks the fish preparation and nods approval. He examines the roasting corn and instructs the workers to continue turning the ears regularly. He tastes the beans and determines they need more cooking time before they'll be tender enough. Everything is progressing, but nothing is quite ready yet. Another hour of preparation, Tomás announces to the assembled cooking crew. Then we begin the final cooking phase. Everything must be ready by the time Father Lopez finishes Mass. The Admiral wants the feast to begin immediately after the religious service concludes. That means we need perfect timing. Nothing finished too early and getting cold. Nothing still cooking when people are ready to eat. 1 hour more of preparation. Then we cook everything simultaneously and serve it hot. 1 more hour. The final preparations continue as the afternoon light begins to fade into early evening. The cooking fires are lit now, flames leaping upward from the carefully prepared pits, the wood catching quickly and burning with satisfying heat. The fires will need to burn for a while to create the beds of coals necessary for proper cooking, so they're started early to ensure they'll be ready when the actual cooking phase begins. You're assigned to fire maintenance for this final hour, keeping the flames fed with appropriately sized wood, ensuring they burn evenly and hot, creating the coal beds that will provide the sustained heat necessary for cooking the feast. It's hot work, standing near the fires that are already radiating intense heat, but it's also satisfying in its way, tending these flames that will cook America's first Thanksgiving meal. The sun continues its descent, the light becoming softer and more golden, the shadows lengthening across the beach. The entire settlement seems to pause in anticipation. The landing work has mostly stopped. The supply organisation is complete enough for now, and everyone's attention is focused on the two major events that remain: the Mass that Father Lopez will celebrate and the feast that will follow. History is being made in these mundane preparations, in these hours of unglamorous labour that will be forgotten while the dramatic moments are remembered. But the feast wouldn't happen without this work, without these fires and these carefully prepared ingredients, and these exhausted workers who've spent the day creating the infrastructure for celebration. The afternoon shifts toward evening, and the time approaches for the spiritual foundation of this settlement. The Mass that will make this day more than just another colonial landing, the Mass that history will mostly forget while remembering a different Thanksgiving 56 years in the future. As the sun descends toward the western horizon, as the cooking reaches its final stages, and the aroma of roasting meat and fish and baking bread fills the entire settlement with smells that make everyone's mouth water and stomach growl, Admiral Menendez gives the order for everyone to assemble for Mass. The soldiers beat drums to get attention, a military signal that's been used throughout the day to mark shift changes and meal times and other significant moments. And the colonists begin gathering near, where Father Lopez's portable altar has been set up on a slight rise in the beach that makes it visible from everywhere in the immediate area. This is the moment that makes this day more than just a landing, more than just the establishment of another colonial settlement in European imperial competition. This Mass of Thanksgiving will be the first Catholic service celebrated in what will eventually become the United States of America, the first time the Eucharist is consecrated on this shore, the first formal giving of thanks to God by European colonists on North American soil that will remain permanently settled. But history will forget this Mass. In 300 years, American students will learn about Protestant prayers at Plymouth, about Pilgrims thanking God for surviving their first harsh New England winter, about William Bradford and the Mayflower Compact, and the democratic traditions that supposedly began with English colonists in Massachusetts. They won't learn about Father Francisco Lopez de Mendoza, Grajales conducting Mass on a Florida beach, about Catholic colonists kneeling in the sand to receive communion, about this earlier, more southern, more Catholic Thanksgiving that happened 56 years before Plymouth. The erasure hasn't happened yet though. Right now, this is just history unfolding in real time. Significant history, meaningful history, history that's real and important, regardless of whether future generations will remember it or whether they'll choose to focus on different events that better serve their preferred narratives about American origins. You make your way from the cooking area toward where the assembly is forming, along with Juan and Rodrigo and dozens of other workers who've been preparing the feast all afternoon. Everyone is exhausted, sweaty, sandy, sunburned from hours of labour in the intense sun, hardly looking proper for a religious ceremony, hardly dressed appropriately for participating in Mass. But there's no time to clean up properly, no facilities for proper washing and changing of clothes, no way to make yourselves presentable according to the standards you'd maintain in Spain. You'll attend Mass as you are, trusting that God will understand the circumstances and accept worship from colonists who've been working hard to establish his settlement in new territory, who are physically depleted but spiritually earnest in their gratitude for safe arrival. The Timucua are gathering too, standing in a loose group slightly apart from the Spanish colonists, but clearly planning to observe the ceremony with respectful attention. There are perhaps 30 native people present now, men, women, and several children who've appeared with the women, their small faces curious and wondering about these strange visitors and their unfamiliar rituals, their eyes wide as they take in the unusual sight of hundreds of Spanish colonists assembling in organised rows. The Timucua are arranged near the tree line, close enough to observe clearly, but maintaining some distance that might be caution or might simply be respect for Spanish religious practices they don't fully understand and don't wish to accidentally disturb. Their positioning suggests both interest and circumspection. They want to see what the Spanish do, want to learn about these newcomers' spiritual practices, but they're also maintaining the ability to leave quickly if something unexpected or uncomfortable happens. Father Francisco López de Mendoza Grajales stands before his portable altar, which has been positioned with careful attention to visibility and symbolism. The altar is simple, just a wooden table perhaps 3 feet long and 2 feet wide, constructed from planks that were carried aboard the San Pelayo for this specific purpose, but it's been prepared with care and ceremony that elevate it from ordinary furniture to sacred space. White linen cloth covers the rough wood, the cloth somehow remaining remarkably clean despite the beach sand, an afternoon wind, and the general chaos of the landing. Someone, probably Father Lopez himself or one of the designated altar servers, has been protecting and maintaining this cloth throughout the day, ensuring that it would be properly clean for this important Mass. The cloth drapes over the altar edges, the corners weighted with small stones to prevent the sea breeze from lifting them. Candlesticks stand at each corner of the altar, simple metal holders supporting white candles that burn with small flames barely visible in the evening light, but that symbolically mark this as sacred space, set apart from ordinary use. The candles flicker slightly in the breeze, their flames bending but not extinguishing, persisting despite the wind in a way that might seem symbolically significant to those inclined to see divine providence in such details. And behind the altar, tall and stark against the sky, stands the wooden cross that travelled from Spain in the San Pelayo's hold. The cross is perhaps 7 feet tall, made from heavy wood that's been carefully carved and smoothed, with a representation of Christ crucified attached at the intersection of the vertical and horizontal beams. The figure of Christ is carved wood, probably created by a Spanish craftsman specifically for this expedition, showing Jesus in his suffering, head bowed, arms stretched along the crossbeam, feet nailed together at the base. It's not an elaborate or particularly artistic representation, no gold leaf or jeweled decorations or sophisticated sculptural detail, but it's unmistakably Christian, unmistakably Catholic, unmistakably a statement that European faith has arrived in this place and intends to remain. The cross casts a long shadow across the beach as the sun descends behind it, the shadow stretching toward the assembled congregation, as if reaching out to embrace them, as if physically claiming this space and these people for Christian faith and Spanish power. Father Lopez is wearing his full ceremonial vestments now, the first time most colonists have seen them since the voyage began. The vestments have been carefully preserved throughout the journey, protected from salt spray and water damage in the waterproof trunk where Father Lopez kept his most precious religious items, saved specifically for this moment when they would mark the founding Mass with appropriate ceremony and dignity. The chasuble is white with gold embroidery, white being the liturgical colour for feast days and celebrations, gold signifying the importance of the occasion. The embroidery shows religious symbols in thread that might actually be real gold, though more likely it's just metallic thread that creates a gold appearance. The designs include crosses, chalices, perhaps images of saints, though from where you're standing the details are difficult to see clearly. The stole bears additional symbols of the priesthood, marking Father Lopez as someone authorized by the Catholic Church to conduct the sacred mysteries, someone who stands in the line of apostolic succession, stretching back through centuries of bishops and priests to the original apostles chosen by Christ himself. Everything about the vestments communicates authority and sacredness, setting Father Lopez apart as someone who occupies a special role as mediator between the human and the divine. The Spanish colonists settle into position facing the altar, the crowd organising itself with surprising efficiency given the lack of formal directions. Some men kneel in the sand closest to the altar, the first rows of the assembly. Behind them, others stand in organised rows, everyone arranging themselves so that all can see the altar and the priest, everyone positioning themselves to participate fully in the Mass. The organisation happens almost automatically, the product of Catholic upbringing that taught everyone how to behave in church, how to position oneself for Mass, how to show proper respect in God's presence. Admiral Pedro Menendez de Aviles takes his place in the front row, flanked by his senior officers, the ship captains, the military commanders, the administrative officials who make up the expedition's leadership. His presence here is both political and spiritual. As the temporal leader of this expedition, the man who represents Spanish royal authority in La Florida, his prominent position at Mass demonstrates that Spanish power acknowledges its subordination to divine authority, that even the admiral submits himself to God and participates in worship alongside common colonists. But his presence is also genuinely spiritual. By all accounts, Menendez is a sincerely devout Catholic who takes his religious obligations seriously, who sees this expedition as serving divine purposes as well as Spanish imperial interests, who truly believes that establishing Catholic faith in new territory is as important as claiming land for King Philip II. Father Lopez raises his hands, the sleeves of his chasuble falling back to reveal the white fabric beneath, and the assembled crowd falls silent immediately. The transformation is remarkable. Seconds earlier there was the general rustle and murmur of hundreds of people settling into position, the small conversations and coughs and shuffling of feet that characterize any large gathering. Now there is complete silence, broken only by natural sounds. The gentle waves on the beach perhaps 50 yards away, the distant calls of seabirds heading to their evening roosts, and the crackling of the cooking fires being maintained by the small crew who must continue working even during the religious service to ensure the feast will be ready immediately afterward. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. The Latin words carry across the beach, ancient phrases that have been spoken in churches and cathedrals across Europe for centuries, that have been part of Catholic worship for over 1,000 years, that connect this beach service to the great tradition of Catholic liturgy, stretching back through the Middle Ages to the late Roman Empire, and ultimately to the early church in Jerusalem and Rome. The words are formulaic, repeated in every Catholic Mass regardless of location or circumstance, part of the unchanging ritual that provides continuity across time and space. The Spanish colonists cross themselves in unison, hundreds of right hands moving together in the familiar gesture, touching forehead, then chest, then left shoulder, then right shoulder, tracing the sign of the cross on their own bodies. Amen. The gesture is automatic for anyone raised Catholic, performed thousands of times throughout a lifetime, as natural as breathing, requiring no conscious thought. But here, on this beach, on this September evening in 1565, the simple gesture carries additional weight and significance. It's a claiming of territory, a declaration that Christian faith has arrived in this place and intends to stay, a physical marking of bodies as belonging to Christ and to the Catholic Church. The Timucua watch this mass movement with obvious interest, seeing hundreds of people perform the same gesture simultaneously, clearly recognizing this as some kind of ritual significance, even though they don't understand the specific meaning. Several Timucua children point at the gesture, speaking quietly to their parents in their own language, probably asking what the strange hand movements mean. Father Lopez begins the Mass following the traditional Catholic liturgy as established by the Council of Trent earlier in this century. The Mass follows a fixed structure, the same basic outline, whether it's celebrated in a grand cathedral, in Spain, or on a beach in La Florida. This consistency is part of Catholicism's power. Wherever you go in the Catholic world, Mass is recognisably the same, providing spiritual continuity and connection even when everything else is foreign and strange. The prayers are in Latin, the ancient language of the Church, the language that educated clergy learn regardless of their native tongue. the language that provides unity across the diverse peoples who make up the Catholic world. Most of the colonists present don't understand more than a few basic Latin phrases. The language of ordinary people in Spain is Spanish, not Latin. But comprehension of specific words isn't really the point. The power of the Mass comes from its ritual nature, from the repetition of sacred formulas, from participation in something larger than individual understanding. Kyrie eleison, Lord have mercy. Christ eleison, Christ have mercy. Kyrie eleison, Lord have mercy. The ancient Greek words, even older than the Latin that surrounds them, preserved from the earliest days of Christian worship, express humanity's fundamental relationship with the divine. Recognition of unworthiness combined with hope for grace and mercy. Acknowledgement of sin combined with trust in divine compassion. The colonists don't speak Greek any more than they speak fluent Latin, but they understand the meaning that's been taught to them since childhood, the basic theological concepts that these ancient words express. You're kneeling in the sand, your knees sinking slightly into the loose surface, finding the firmest ground you can to support your weight for the extended period of kneeling that Catholic Mass requires. Your hands are folded in the prayer position that's been ingrained since childhood, palms together, fingers pointing upward, thumbs crossed. Your head bowed when liturgically appropriate, looking up at the altar when the ritual requires it. The Mass proceeds through its traditional structure, following patterns that have been established over centuries. Scripture readings, carefully selected by Father Lopez for their thematic appropriateness to this occasion. The first reading is from the book of Exodus, the account of the Israelites' escape from Egypt and their journey through the wilderness toward the Promised Land, a clear parallel to the Spanish expedition's journey across the Atlantic to this new land of promise and opportunity. Father Lopez reads the passage in Latin first, as liturgical tradition requires, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled congregation. Then, departing slightly from strict liturgical practice, but recognizing the pastoral importance of comprehension, he provides a Spanish summary of the passage, ensuring that everyone understands the basic content, even if they didn't follow the Latin. The reading tells how God delivered the Israelites from slavery in Egypt, Father Lopez explains in Spanish, how he parted the Red Sea to allow them to escape their enemies, how he led them through the wilderness with a pillar of cloud by day and fire by night, how he provided manna from heaven when they were hungry and water from stone when they were thirsty. Just as God protected the Israelites during their journey to the Promised Land, so too has he protected us during our journey across the ocean to this new land. The parallel is obvious and probably too neat to be entirely theologically sound, but it resonates with the congregation, who can easily see themselves in the Israelites' story. They too have escaped from one place and journeyed to another. They too have faced dangers and privations during the journey. They too are hoping to find a promised land where they can establish new lives and build a better future. The Gospel reading is from the Gospel of Luke, the story of Jesus feeding 5,000 people with just 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Father Lopez reads the familiar story, how Jesus took the small amount of food, blessed it, broke it, and distributed it to the crowd. How everyone ate and was satisfied. How 12 baskets of leftovers were collected afterward, demonstrating that God's provision exceeds human need. Again, Father Lopez provides Spanish summary and interpretation. Just as Jesus multiplied the loaves and fishes to feed the multitude, so too will God multiply our limited provisions to feed this settlement. We have brought food from Spain, yes, but it will not last forever. We must trust that God will provide, that He will bless our efforts to establish agriculture and trade with the native peoples, that He will ensure we have what we need to survive and thrive in this new land. The reading is particularly appropriate given that the Spanish and Timucua are about to share a feast together, about to see limited provisions from both peoples combined and shared in a way that will feed everyone present. Whether this constitutes an actual miracle on the scale of Jesus' feeding of the 5,000 is debatable, but the symbolic resonance is clear and meaningful. Father Lopez delivers the homily in Spanish rather than Latin, ensuring his message reaches everyone in the congregation without the barrier of a language that most don't understand. He stands before the altar, looking out at the assembled Spanish and at the Timucua observers standing at the gathering's edge, and he speaks with genuine emotion that transforms his normally austere demeanour. Brothers and sisters in Christ, we have completed a perilous journey across the vast Atlantic Ocean. For 3 months, we have been at sea, facing dangers that many times threatened to end our voyage in disaster and death. Many times during these past months, we faced storms that could have destroyed our ships and sent us all to watery graves at the bottom of the ocean. The waves rose higher than the ship's masts. The wind tore at the sails and rigging. The ships pitched and rolled until it seemed certain they must capsize. Many times we prayed desperately for deliverance, for God's protection, for safe arrival at our destination. Many times death seemed near, seemed inevitable, seemed certain to claim us before we could reach this shore. But God answered our prayers. He heard our desperate cries from the storm-tossed ships. He held our vessels in the palm of his hand and carried us safely across thousands of miles of dangerous waters. He calmed the storms that threatened us, or gave us the strength to endure them when calming wasn't his will. He preserved us from disease that so often devastates ships during long voyages, when men are crowded together in close quarters with limited food and contaminated water. He guided us to this harbour, to this beautiful shore, to this place where he intends for us to establish a new community of faith that will bring his gospel to peoples who have never heard the name of Christ. And more than this, more than merely protecting our voyage and delivering us safely to land, God has blessed us with peaceful welcome. The people who lived here before us, the Timucua people, whose land this has been since time beyond memory, have chosen to greet us with curiosity and friendship rather than hostility and violence. They have offered to share their knowledge of this land, their fish from these waters and corn from their gardens, their wisdom about living in this place that we know nothing about. This peaceful beginning is as much a divine blessing as our safe voyage across the ocean. We deserve neither the safe arrival nor the peaceful welcome, yet God has granted us both through his infinite mercy and grace. Previous Spanish expeditions to La Florida have ended in failure and violence, in conflict with native peoples, and eventual retreat back to Spain or other colonies. But perhaps this time will be different. Perhaps God has special purposes for this settlement, special plans for bringing his gospel to this land, special intentions for creating here a community that serves him faithfully and treats all people with justice and charity as Christ commanded. Therefore, we gather this evening to give thanks, to acknowledge that our success is not our own doing, but God's blessing upon us. We thank God for protecting our voyage through storms and dangers. We thank God for this land with its resources and beauty. We thank God for the Timucua people and their generous welcome that gives us hope for peaceful coexistence. We thank God for every blessing we have received, for every danger we have escaped, for every hope we hold for the future. And we commit ourselves, here now, on this beach before God and these witnesses, to building a settlement that honours God in all things, that serves Spain faithfully as loyal subjects of His Majesty King Philip, that treats the native peoples with justice and respect as human beings created in God's image, that spreads the gospel of Jesus Christ with love rather than force, with example rather than coercion, that becomes a shining light of what Christian civilization can achieve when guided by faith and goodness and commitment to God's purposes. This Mass, this feast we will share after this service concludes. This gathering of Spanish and Timucua together in peace and mutual hospitality These are the foundation stones upon which we will build our new community. May God bless our work. May God guide our decisions. May God grant us wisdom and strength and perseverance to succeed where others have failed. May God make this settlement a place where His name is honoured and His will is done. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. The homily captures something essential about this occasion and about the hopes and intentions that motivated this expedition. The congregation listens attentively, recognizing that their chaplain is speaking from deep conviction, that these aren't just formulaic words but heartfelt expression of faith and commitment. The Mass continues toward its climax, the consecration of bread and wine, the moment when Catholic theology teaches that these ordinary elements are transformed through the miracle of transubstantiation into the body and blood of Christ. This is the heart of Catholic worship, the moment that distinguishes Catholic Mass from Protestant services, that view communion as merely symbolic, the sacred mystery that's been central to Catholic faith since Jesus celebrated the Last Supper with his disciples. Father Lopez takes the bread, simple wheat bread that's been baked specifically for this purpose, kept separate from the ordinary provisions, prepared according to church requirements for Eucharistic use. He holds the bread in both hands, elevating it slightly so the congregation can see, and speaks the words of institution, the words that Jesus spoke at the Last Supper and that priests have repeated ever since, hoc est enim corpus meum. This is my body. The Latin words carry immense theological weight. Catholic doctrine teaches that these words, spoken by an ordained priest during Mass, literally transform the bread into Christ's body. Not symbolically, not metaphorically, but actually and substantially, even though the bread continues to look and taste like bread. This doctrine of transubstantiation has been central to Catholic teaching for centuries, defended against Protestant critiques, insisted upon as essential to true Christian faith. Father Lopez elevates the consecrated host high above his head, raising it so all can see this piece of bread that Catholic faith declares is now the body of Christ. The Spanish colonists bow their heads in adoration, showing reverence for what they believe is the real presence of Christ before them. A small bell rings. One of the altar servers is performing his duty of marking the moment of consecration with an audible signal, and the sound carries across the beach, marking this instant as supremely sacred and significant. The consecration continues with the wine. Father Lopez takes the chalice, a silver cup that's been carefully preserved throughout the voyage, one of the precious items that Father Lopez brought from Spain, specifically for celebrating Mass. He pours wine into the chalice, red wine that's been reserved for this sacred purpose, and speaks the second formula of consecration, hic est enim calix sanguinis mei. This is the cup of my blood. Again the elevation, again the bell, again the bowing of heads in reverence. Catholic doctrine teaches that the wine has now become Christ's blood, that this chalice contains not merely symbolic representation, but actual divine presence, that Jesus is truly and substantially present in these consecrated elements. The Timucua watch all this with obvious interest and some confusion. They don't understand the theology, don't share the beliefs that make these actions meaningful to Catholics, don't know anything about Last Suppers or crucifixions or resurrection or the doctrines that have developed around these events, but they clearly recognize that something sacred is happening, that these actions and words carry profound significance for the Spanish, that this is a moment of deep spiritual meaning, even if the specific content is incomprehensible. They stand quietly, respectfully, observing a religious tradition that's completely foreign to their experience, but that they're willing to witness without disruption or mockery. Their respectful attention speaks well of them, suggests a spiritual sensibility that recognizes the sacred even when it takes unfamiliar forms. The Mass continues with additional prayers and ceremonies. The Pater Noster, Lord's Prayer that all Christians share, the Agnus Dei, Lamb of God, with its threefold petition for mercy, the preparation for communion, when those who wish will receive the consecrated bread that Catholic faith declares is Christ's body. Then comes the communion procession. Spanish colonists come forward in orderly lines, approaching the altar in groups of perhaps 20 at a time, kneeling before Father Lopez to receive the consecrated host on their tongues. This is the spiritual nourishment that sustains Catholic faith, the tangible symbol of God's presence and provision. The sacrament that Catholic theology teaches unites individual believers to Christ and to each other in the mystical body of the Church. You take your place in the communion line, waiting as it moves slowly forward, watching as each colonist receives the host, returns to their place, kneels again to pray in thanksgiving. The line moves steadily, the distribution proceeding efficiently despite the large number of people seeking communion. When your turn comes, you approach the altar rail. There is no actual rail, just an imaginary line where communicants kneel, but the concept is clear. You kneel in the sand, tilt your head back, and extend your tongue in the traditional posture for receiving communion. Father Lopez places the small wafer of consecrated bread on your tongue, Corpus Christi, the body of Christ, and you respond automatically with the word every Catholic learns in childhood: Amen. The host begins to dissolve immediately, the wheat bread having little flavour but carrying immense spiritual significance according to the faith you were raised in. You return to your place in the congregation, kneeling again, bowing your head in prayer, as you've been taught to do after receiving communion, giving thanks for God's provision, for safe arrival, for the promise of this new beginning. The communion distribution continues for perhaps 20 minutes. There are hundreds of people seeking to receive, and even with efficient distribution, the process takes time. Father Lopez maintains patient dignity throughout, speaking the formula over and over: Corpus Christi, Corpus Christi, Corpus Christi. Each communicant receives the same words, the same small piece of consecrated bread, the same moment of personal encounter with what Catholic faith declares is divine presence in physical form. Finally, everyone who wishes has received communion. Father Lopez completes the consumption of remaining consecrated elements. Catholic practice requires that all consecrated bread and wine be consumed during Mass, rather than being saved for later, to prevent any desecration of what the Church teaches is Christ's actual body and blood. The Mass concludes with final prayers and the blessing Dominus vobiscum, the Lord be with you, et cum spiritu tuo, and with your spirit. Benedicat vos omnipotens Deus, Pater, et Filius, et Spiritus Sanctus. May Almighty God bless you, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Ite missa est. Go, the Mass is ended. Deo gratias. Thanks be to God. America's first Thanksgiving Mass is complete. History has been made, though history will forget. The sacred mysteries have been celebrated on new soil. Catholic worship has been established in territory that will eventually become the United States. Thanksgiving has been offered to God for protection and blessing and safe arrival. In his diary tonight, Father Francisco Lopez de Mendoza Grajales will write extensively about this Mass, describing it as the most meaningful service of his entire priestly career, spanning more than 2 decades. He'll note the humble surroundings, the beach rather than a church, the sand rather than a proper floor, the sky rather than a vaulted ceiling. He'll describe the attendance of native peoples, observing with respectful curiosity. He'll express the sense of profound gratitude that characterized the gathering, the genuine thanksgiving that motivated the service, the hope that this settlement will succeed in bringing Catholic faith to new peoples and new territories. His diary entry will survive in Spanish archives for centuries, carefully preserved in the General Archive of the Indies in Seville, catalogued and occasionally consulted by scholars who specialize in Spanish colonial history. A few historians will read his account and recognize its significance. A few books will mention this mass in footnotes or brief passages. But the American public will remain mostly ignorant of this event. We'll continue learning about Plymouth instead. We'll think of Thanksgiving as beginning in 1621 rather than 1565. But the Mass happened. The Thanksgiving was offered. The gratitude was real and heartfelt, expressed in the ancient liturgical language of the Catholic Church, made tangible through the sharing of consecrated bread that Catholic faith declares is Christ's body. History will erase this Mass from national memory. But it happened, nonetheless. As the formal religious ceremony concludes, as Father Lopez begins removing his vestments and carefully packing away the altar supplies that will be used again in future Masses, attention shifts naturally to the feast that's been preparing all afternoon. The cooking fires have been maintained throughout the Mass, the food has reached its final stages of preparation, and now finally, America's first Thanksgiving meal is ready to be served. The transition from sacred service to communal feast happens naturally, organically, without any formal announcement or obvious dividing line. The Spanish colonists begin to disperse from their assembled positions, stretching cramped legs that have been kneeling or standing for over an hour, moving gradually toward the cooking area, where Tomas and his crew are making final preparations to begin serving the hundreds of people who are now extremely hungry after a day of labour and an hour of religious observance. The Timucua also begin moving, their initial observer distance dissolving as they're welcomed toward the food with gestures and, through Pedro's translation, invited to participate fully in this shared meal, rather than remaining at the edges as mere observers. This is Thanksgiving in its fullest sense, not just formal prayers offered to God, but the concrete expression of that gratitude through generous hospitality, through shared abundance, through the simple human act of breaking bread together across cultural divides, through the choice to celebrate survival and safe arrival by feeding everyone who's present without distinction between Spanish and native, soldier and civilian, leader and common labourer. The feast is ready. America's first Thanksgiving meal is about to be served. The serving begins as the last light fades from the western sky, and the cooking fires become the primary source of illumination, their flames casting dancing shadows across the beach and creating pools of orange light in the gathering darkness. Tomas has organised the food presentation with the same military precision he brought to its preparation, creating serving areas arranged in a logical flow pattern that allows hundreds of people to receive their portions, without creating dangerous crowding or inefficient chaos. The smell that's been tantalising everyone for hours is now overwhelming, almost intoxicating in its intensity. Real food, properly cooked, abundant and varied, is actually being distributed to hundreds of hungry people who've been surviving on ships' rations for months, or who've been working without break since dawn to establish this settlement. The aroma includes roasted meat, grilled fish, baking bread, cooking beans, all combining into a complex scent profile that makes your empty stomach clamp with desperate hunger. The salt pork has been transformed by hours of careful preparation. The meat that was grey and hard and impossibly salty this morning is now brown and tender and properly seasoned, still salty enough to have good flavour, but no longer overwhelming, the fat rendered and glistening, the edges crispy where they've been nearest the flames during the roasting process. Spanish cooks are carving the roasted meat into chunks and slices with sharp knives, the blade cutting through the tender flesh easily, distributing portions that are far more generous than the careful rationing that characterised the voyage. Each person receives perhaps half a pound of salt pork, an amount that would have seemed impossible luxury during the voyage when portions were measured in ounces rather than pounds, when every piece of meat was carefully counted to ensure supplies would last until landfall. But this is a celebration, a feast, and the Admiral has ordered generous portions that demonstrate abundance rather than scarcity. The fish is magnificent in its variety and preparation. Multiple species prepared by both Spanish and Timucua methods line the serving tables on wooden boards and large leaves that serve as platters. The Spanish grilled fish has crispy skin that crackles slightly when you touch it, revealing flaky white flesh underneath that's been simply seasoned with salt and perhaps some herbs from Spain. The flesh is moist and tender, cooked perfectly through without being overdone. The natural flavours of the fish enhanced rather than overwhelmed by the preparation method. The Timucua wrapped fish offers completely different flavours and textures. These fish were cooked in their leaf wrappings directly on hot coals, and the leaves have imparted subtle flavours that are completely novel to European palates. The fish tastes slightly smoky, slightly sweet, with herbal notes from the leaves that you can't identify, but that are clearly the product of sophisticated culinary knowledge developed over generations. The flesh is incredibly moist, steamed within its leaf wrapping, tender enough to fall apart at the slightest touch. You can't resist sampling both preparation methods, taking portions of each type of fish to compare them directly. The Spanish method is familiar, tastes like fish you might have eaten in Spain, though fresher and better. The Timucua method is exotic and exciting, completely new flavours that expand your understanding of what fish can taste like when prepared with different techniques and seasonings. The corn is a revelation that almost defies description. You've eaten dried corn before during the voyage, and in Spain, always in forms that required long cooking to become barely edible, always bland and tough, and frankly unpleasant. But this fresh corn, roasted by the Timucua women, according to their traditional method, is completely and totally different from anything you've experienced. The ears are still hot from the cooking fires, the charred husks protecting your fingers enough that you can hold them despite the heat. You peel back the blackened husk, revealing kernels that are bright yellow and gleaming with moisture. The first bite releases a burst of sweetness that's almost shocking. You didn't know corn could taste like this? Didn't know that this grain could be sweet and juicy rather than bland and starchy? The kernels are tender enough to bite easily, but still have some texture, some resistance that makes them satisfying to chew. The charring on the outside adds a smoky flavour that complements the natural sweetness perfectly. You eat one ear quickly, barely tasting it in your hunger, then grab another ear and force yourself to slow down, to actually savour the flavours rather than just consuming calories as fast as possible. The garbanzo beans have been elevated from their usual role as bland protein filler into something that's actually enjoyable to eat. Hours of simmering have made them tender throughout, soft enough to chew easily without being mushy or falling apart. The beans have been cooked with some of the salt pork drippings, which has given them a rich, savoury flavour that transforms them from tolerable necessity into genuine pleasure. Some herbs, you're not sure what kind, perhaps from Spanish supplies, or perhaps gathered locally by the Timucua, add additional layers of flavour that make each spoonful interesting rather than monotonous. The squash, prepared according to various Timucua methods, offers even more variety. Some pieces have been roasted directly on coals until the exterior is caramelised and sweet. The natural sugars in the squash concentrated and transformed by the high heat. These pieces are soft and almost creamy inside, with a sweet, rich flavour that seems impossible for a vegetable to achieve. Other pieces have been boiled until tender, then perhaps seasoned with salt or herbs, creating a simpler but still satisfying side dish. The variety means that even something as simple as squash provides multiple different eating experiences. And the bread, sweet saints in heaven, the fresh bread. It's still warm from the makeshift stone ovens where it's been baking all afternoon, the crust golden brown and crackling when you break it, the interior soft and chewy, with the slightly sour tang that comes from proper fermentation of the dough. The bread has been shaped by hand into rough loaves, nothing fancy or artistic, just functional rounds that maximise interior softness while providing enough crust to hold everything together. Even plain, with nothing on it, the bread tastes like the finest delicacy after months of rock-hard ship's biscuit that required soaking before it could be consumed without breaking teeth. You tear off a large piece, the crust shattering satisfyingly, and eat it plain first, just experiencing the simple perfection of fresh bread. Then you tear another piece and use it to soak up meat juices from your wooden plate, the bread absorbing the flavorful liquid and becoming even more delicious. Wine flows more freely than it has since leaving Spain, poured from barrels that have been reserved for this celebration. The wine is rough red table wine, nothing fancy or expensive, the kind of common wine that ordinary people drink with ordinary meals throughout Spain. It's not complex or refined. It's slightly acidic, somewhat harsh, with tannins that make your mouth feel dry. But after months of carefully rationed servings, where every cup had to be justified and recorded, the freedom to drink as much as you want, to have your wooden cup refilled without counting the cost, feels like incredible luxury. You drink deeply, the wine cutting through the richness of the fatty salt pork, cleansing your palate between bites of different foods, warming your stomach pleasantly. The alcohol takes effect quickly, creating a gentle buzz that makes everything seem slightly more pleasant, that loosens tension and increases the general sense of celebration and community. You're sitting on the sand with Juan and Rodrigo and several other colonists, a loose group that formed naturally as people collected their food and looked for places to eat. Everyone has wooden plates or large pieces of bark serving as makeshift plates, piled high with portions of the various foods. Everyone is eating with the focused intensity of people who've been truly hungry and are now experiencing genuine abundance. For the first few minutes, nobody talks. Everyone is too busy eating, too occupied with the pleasure of good food properly prepared. The only sounds are chewing, swallowing, the occasional grunt of satisfaction, the scrape of wooden implements against wooden plates, the tearing of bread and corn husks. Your stomach, which has been cramping with hunger all afternoon, begins to feel satisfied for the first time in months. The sensation is almost overwhelming. Fullness, genuine fullness, the feeling of having eaten not just enough to stop hunger, but enough to feel completely satisfied. Your body, which has been operating on minimal calories for 3 months, responds to the abundance with something approaching euphoria. But it's not just the physical satisfaction of food. It's also the variety, the flavors, the experience of eating things that taste good rather than just things that provide calories. After months of monotonous ship's rations where every meal was essentially the same, the variety available at this feast is almost overwhelming. Do you want more fish? Which kind? More corn? Another piece of bread? Different squash preparation? More wine? The abundance allows choice, and choice is a luxury you'd forgotten existed. Around you on the beach, hundreds of people are having similar experiences. Spanish colonists are eating with desperate enthusiasm, making up for months of deprivation. Timucua guests are sampling Spanish foods with curiosity, trying preserved meat and bread and wine that are foreign to their experience, comparing these new flavors to their own traditional foods. One of the Timucua men has positioned himself near your group, sitting cross-legged on the sand with his own portion of food. You notice he's eating more of the fish and corn, foods that must be familiar to him from Timucua diet, than the salt pork, which makes sense. The heavily preserved, intensely salty European meat must seem strange and not particularly appealing to someone accustomed to fresh fish and game. But he's trying everything politely, taking at least a small portion of each food, showing respect for Spanish hospitality even when the flavors aren't to his taste. When he catches your eye, you gesture to the fish and make an exaggerated expression of enjoyment, trying to communicate across the language barrier that you think the Timucua prepared fish is delicious. He grins, clearly pleased that his people's cooking methods are being appreciated, and offers you more fish from his own portion, a gesture of sharing that transcends the need for words. You accept the additional fish gratefully and in return, offer him a piece of your bread, demonstrating by eating some yourself that it's good. He accepts, examines the bread with curiosity, takes a cautious bite. His expression suggests he's pleasantly surprised by the flavour. Bread must be novel to someone whose diet is based on corn rather than wheat, whose people probably don't have ovens or the technology to produce European-style leavened bread. This small exchange, this sharing of food across cultural divides without any formal interpretation or translation, feels significant in ways that go beyond the immediate moment. You're building connections through the universal language of food and generosity, establishing bonds that might strengthen over time into genuine friendship, or at least mutual respect. The feast continues through the evening as darkness falls completely and the cooking fires become the only significant light sources, creating islands of illumination in the night. The meal extends for hours. There's no rush, no pressure to finish quickly and return to work. This is a celebration, a marking of successful arrival, a commitment to building something lasting in this new land. People eat slowly, talk, laugh, enjoy the rare luxury of abundant food and relative leisure. Groups of Spanish colonists mix gradually with groups of Timucua, facilitated by Pedro's struggling interpretation when more complex communication is needed, but also simply through the shared experience of eating together, of participating in the same celebration. Spanish soldiers talk with Timucua men through whatever translation is available, learning basic information about the local area, asking about water sources and game patterns and the territories of other native peoples. The Timucua ask about Spain in return, about the ocean crossing, about the great ships that brought so many people so far. The children, both Spanish and Timucua, overcome their shyness more quickly than the adults. Several Timucua children approach Spanish families, curious about the clothing and equipment that's so different from their own experience. Spanish children stare openly at the Timucua, fascinated by the tattoos and the different physical appearance and the minimal clothing. Parents on both sides monitor these interactions carefully, but allow them to proceed, understanding that children's natural curiosity and lack of prejudice might build bridges more effectively than adult diplomacy. Father Lopez circulates through the feast, speaking with various groups, blessing the food and fellowship when groups invite his participation. He's removed his formal vestments, but is still clearly identifiable as the priest, and both Spanish and Timucua show him respect appropriate to someone who holds spiritual authority. Through Pedro's interpretation, he attempts to engage some of the Timucua in basic theological discussions, trying to explain Catholic concepts, though the language barrier makes anything more than very simple ideas almost impossible to communicate. Admiral Menendez moves through the feast as well, a wine cup in hand, speaking with his officers and soldiers, checking on the common colonists, making a point of acknowledging the Timucua guests personally, even when meaningful communication is difficult. His presence is calculated to reinforce unity and morale, to demonstrate that he sees himself as part of this community rather than standing above it, to show appreciation for everyone's contributions to the successful landing and feast preparation. He makes multiple toasts throughout the evening, each one requiring a pause in conversations as people raise their cups to acknowledge the sentiment. The toasts honour King Philip II of Spain, who funded this expedition and whose authority the admiral represents. They honour the success of the settlement, may it thrive and grow and fulfil its purposes. They honour friendship with the Timucua, may peaceful relations continue and benefit both peoples. They honour every person present who contributed to making this moment possible. Soldiers and sailors, workers and cooks, priests and leaders, everyone who played a role, however small, in the successful journey and landing. Each toast is translated by Pedro as well as he can, and both Spanish and Timucua raise their cups, wooden cups for most Spanish colonists, shells or carved vessels for the Timucua, in shared gesture of celebration. The wine flows freely enough that people are beginning to feel its effects more noticeably. Not drunk, but pleasantly relaxed, loosened up, more willing to laugh and socialise across language barriers that seem less important when everyone is well fed and slightly buzzed. Eventually, as late evening transitions toward true night, the feast naturally begins to wind down. Bellies are full, almost uncomfortably full after months of restricted diet, and bodies that have been working since dawn are demanding rest. People have eaten multiple helpings, have consumed far more food than would be typical for an ordinary meal, and now the natural consequence is drowsiness and satisfied lethargy. The Timucua begin preparing to depart, gathering their empty baskets and the few items they've received in trade for the food contributions they brought. The Admiral walks with them to the forest edge, speaking through Pedro's translation, thanking them effusively for their generous participation in the feast, expressing hope for continued peaceful relations and mutually beneficial trade in the days and weeks ahead. The Timucua leader responds through halting translation. This has been a good day. The Spanish have shown peaceful hearts and generous hands. They have shared food freely and have treated my people with respect as equals rather than as inferiors or curiosities. We will tell our village about this feast, about the Spanish and their ways, about the possibility of friendship between our peoples. We will continue trading, continue learning about each other, continue building on this good beginning. Today we began something that could benefit both peoples for many years. May the Spanish settlement prosper. May our friendship endure. The sentiment is heartfelt and hopeful, expressed through translation that probably loses some nuance but that conveys the basic meaning clearly enough. Admiral Menendez responds in kind, speaking slowly to help Pedro with the translation. Today marks the beginning of a friendship that I pray will last for generations to come, that will benefit both Spanish and Timucua, that will be remembered as an example of how different peoples can coexist peacefully when both approach the relationship with good faith and mutual respect. The Spanish did not come to La Florida to drive you from your lands or to make war on your people. We came to establish a settlement, yes, but we wish to do so as good neighbours who trade fairly and treat all people with justice. Thank you for welcoming us with peace rather than hostility. Thank you for sharing your food and knowledge. Thank you for giving this settlement its best chance of success. May God bless you and your people. The Timucua depart as they arrived, walking calmly into the forest, disappearing among the trees with the easy confidence of people in their native territory, leaving the Spanish to digest both the food and the significance of this successful first encounter. After the Timucua leave, the Spanish colonists remain gathered around the dying cooking fires for a while longer, too satisfied and content to immediately disperse to their sleeping areas. The conversation becomes more reflective, more thoughtful about what has been accomplished today and what challenges lie ahead. "We did it," one says quietly, sitting beside you as the fire burns down to coals that glow orange in the darkness. "We landed safely. We made peace with the natives. We celebrated Thanksgiving with a proper feast shared between peoples, and nobody died. That's far better than most Spanish expeditions to La Florida have managed. Much better than anyone had a right to expect, you agree, your voice drowsy with exhaustion and satisfaction. Now, we just have to maintain this peace, build on this foundation, turn this temporary landing into a permanent settlement that actually survives." The forgotten Thanksgiving is complete. The feast has been shared, the work has been done, the first day in the settlement has ended. History has been made, though history will mostly forget these events in favour of later narratives that better serve the cultural and religious stories that dominant groups will prefer to tell. But the making of history doesn't require that history remember. The significance of events doesn't depend on whether future generations acknowledge them. Today happened. The landing, the peaceful meeting with Timucua people, the mass on the beach, the shared feast, all of it. The The historical record preserves these facts in Father Lopez's diary and Spanish colonial documents, available for anyone who cares to look. Maintained in archives that will survive for centuries, even if popular knowledge doesn't incorporate them. St. Augustine endures, the oldest continuously occupied European settlement in the United States, founded on September 8, 1565, 42 years before Jamestown, 56 years before Plymouth. The city exists as living proof that this landing happened, that Spanish colonization succeeded here where it failed elsewhere, that this settlement established roots that grew deep enough to withstand centuries of change and challenge. And you, exhausted colonist, part of the beginning, even though the beginning will be forgotten, participant in history, even though history won't celebrate your participation, builder of something lasting. Even though your name will be erased from the building story, you're ready now for rest, for sleep, for the recovery that will prepare you for tomorrow's challenges. The fires burn low, the stars wheel slowly overhead, and the first day of America's oldest city comes to its close. The feast has ended, bellies are full, and the Timucua guests have departed back into the forest with their empty baskets and expressions of friendship. But the work of the day is not yet complete, not even close to complete actually. The aftermath of feeding 300 people creates its own massive labour requirements that must be addressed before anyone can truly rest. Leftover food must be properly stored to prevent spoilage in the warm Florida climate. Cooking implements must be cleaned and organised for future use. Fire pits must be banked or extinguished depending on whether they'll be needed overnight. Waste must be disposed of properly to prevent attracting animals or creating health hazards. Serving areas must be cleared and organised. The work continues, though with far less energy than characterised the afternoon's preparations. Everyone is exhausted, overfull from the feast, moving slowly with the particular lethargy that comes from combining physical exhaustion with a stomach stretched beyond its normal capacity. But the tasks must be completed regardless of fatigue, regardless of the desperate desire to simply collapse and sleep. Tomas the cook is organising the cleanup operation with the same efficiency he brought to the feast preparation, though his voice now carries the raspy quality of someone who's been shouting instructions all day and whose throat is raw from constant use. He's assigned specific crews to specific tasks, creating order from what could easily become chaos if everyone just wandered off to sleep and left everything scattered across the beach. "You six," he calls out, pointing to a group that includes you, Juan, and 4 others who've been working in the cooking area all afternoon. Food storage is your responsibility. Everything that's left, and there's a substantial amount, despite how much everyone ate, needs to be properly stored before morning. The salt pork that wasn't consumed gets wrapped in clean cloth and stored in the remaining barrels, sealed tight to keep insects out. The fish that's left over, and handle it carefully because fish spoils faster than anything else in this heat, gets wrapped in large leaves. The same kind the Timucua women used for cooking and placed in the coolest spots we can find. Probably that shaded area where the tree line creates some protection from morning sun. The corn can be left in its husks for now. Those provide some natural protection, but stack the ears carefully so air can circulate around them. The beans that are left, and surprisingly there's quite a bit remaining because people filled up on meat and fish first, go into sealed containers. The bread needs to be wrapped in cloth and stored where it will stay as dry as possible despite the humidity. The instructions are detailed and specific, reflecting experience with food preservation in challenging climates. Tomas understands that improper storage tonight will mean spoiled, wasted food tomorrow, and waste is something no colonial settlement can afford when supplies are limited and resupply is months away at best. You begin with the leftover salt pork, which despite the generous portions served, still amounts to perhaps 20 pounds of cooked meat. The meat has cooled from cooking temperature to something closer to ambient air temperature. Warm but not hot, the fat congealed slightly, into a whitish coating that makes the meat look less appetizing than it did when freshly cooked and glistening. But it's still perfectly edible, still valuable protein that will feed people tomorrow or the day after. You and Juan work together to wrap the meat portions in clean cloth, or relatively clean cloth, since truly clean fabric is in short supply after months at sea, where everything gets salt-stained and slightly grimy, no matter how carefully it's maintained. You lay out a square of cloth on a wooden board that's been wiped clean of visible debris, place several chunks of meat in the centre, then fold the corners of the cloth over the meat, creating a bundle that's completely enclosed and somewhat protected from insects and contamination. The wrapping process is tedious and repetitive. Each bundle requires careful folding to ensure no meat is exposed, careful positioning to make the bundle stackable and space efficient, careful tying with cord to keep everything secure. You create bundle after bundle, working methodically through the pile of leftover meat, your hands moving through the familiar motions, even though your brain is too tired to think clearly about what you're doing. Once all the meat is wrapped, you and Juan carry the bundles to one of the partially emptied storage barrels, stacking them carefully inside, arranging them to maximize the use of available space, while still allowing some air circulation that will help prevent spoilage. When the barrel is full, you hammer the wooden lid back into place using a mallet and wooden wedges, sealing it as tightly as you can without proper sealing tools, creating at least some barrier against insects and vermin that will certainly be attracted to any unprotected food. The fish storage is more challenging because fish is so much more perishable than salted meat. The leftover fish, perhaps a dozen pieces of various species and preparations, must be handled with extra care to prevent rapid spoilage that could make people sick. You collect large leaves from the same plants the Timucua women identified earlier, spreading each leaf carefully, placing a piece of fish in the centre, then wrapping the leaf around the fish and securing it with a thin vine or piece of cord. Each wrapped piece goes into a shallow pit that's been dug in the shadiest spot available, a depression, perhaps a foot deep, that's been lined with more leaves to create additional insulation and protection. The pit location has been chosen carefully, under dense tree cover, where morning sun won't penetrate for several hours, positioned where any breeze from the ocean will pass over it and provide some cooling effect, dug into sand that's slightly damp and therefore cooler than the dry surface sand. You arrange the wrapped fish pieces carefully in the pit, leaving small gaps between them so air can circulate, then cover everything with another layer of leaves, then finally with a thin layer of sand that will provide additional insulation and protection. It's not refrigeration, nothing can truly refrigerate food in this climate without ice, but it's the best preservation method available with the resources at hand, and it should keep the fish edible for at least another day, if not longer. The corn storage is simpler. The ears that weren't consumed, perhaps 24 of them, still in their blackened husks, get stacked carefully in a raised basket woven from palm fronds, positioned off the ground to prevent moisture from the sand from affecting them, placed where air can circulate freely around the ears. The husks provide natural protection against most insects and will keep the kernels from drying out too quickly in the dry air. The bean storage requires transferring the leftover cooked beans from the cooking pots into sealed containers. The beans have cooled to room temperature and congealed slightly into a mass that's held together by their own starches and the small amount of cooking liquid remaining. You use a wooden ladle to scoop beans from pot to container, working carefully to avoid spilling because every spoonful represents calories that someone could eat tomorrow, because waste is unconscionable when supplies are so carefully rationed. The containers are ceramic jars with wooden lids, sealed with a bit of cloth wrapped around the rim to create a tighter seal. Each jar holds perhaps 2 or 3 quarts of beans, and you fill 4 jars before the cooking pots are finally empty. The filled jars get stored in the main supply area, where they'll be relatively cool and protected from direct sunlight, where they'll be easy to access when tomorrow's meals need to be prepared. the bread storage is last. The remaining loaves, there are perhaps 6 of them, roughly round shapes that were hand-formed and baked in the makeshift stone ovens, have cooled completely and hardened slightly, as bread does when it's no longer warm from the oven. The crust has become harder and more brittle, though the interior should still be relatively soft. You wrap each loaf individually in cloth, then place all the wrapped loaves together in a wooden crate, positioning them so they won't shift and bounce against each other if the crate is moved, so the crusts won't crack from impact. By the time all the food storage is complete, perhaps an hour has passed since the feast ended. Your arms are tired from carrying containers and bundles. Your back aches from constant bending to arrange items. Your hands are slightly sticky from handling food, despite multiple attempts to wipe them clean on cloth. But the work is done, the food is properly stored, and tomorrow's meals are at least partially provided for, without having to start completely from scratch. Other work crews have been similarly busy throughout the clean-up period. One group has been responsible for cleaning the cooking implements, the large pots that held beans and soaking salt pork, the knives used for cutting and carving, the wooden boards that served as cutting surfaces and serving platters, the ladles and spoons and serving implements. Everything must be thoroughly cleaned to remove food residue that would attract insects and vermin, to prevent contamination that could cause illness, to ensure the implements will be ready for use when the next meal needs to be prepared. The cleaning process happens at the river, where fresh water is abundant and the current can carry away waste without creating problems. You watch this crew working as you pass by on your way. Back from the storage area, men kneeling at the river's edge, scrubbing pots with sand that serves as an abrasive cleanser, rinsing everything multiple times in the flowing water, checking surfaces carefully to ensure all food residue has been removed. The pots are heavy even when empty, and watching men struggle to maneuver them for cleaning while kneeling in awkward positions at the river's edge makes you grateful you were assigned to food storage instead of pot cleaning. Both tasks are essential, both are tedious and demanding, but pot cleaning looks particularly uncomfortable with all that bending and reaching and scrubbing. Another crew is managing the fire pits, making decisions about which fires need to be maintained overnight and which can be allowed to die completely. The cooking fires that were burning so vigorously during feast preparation have burned down to beds of coals, glowing orange and red in the darkness, still radiating substantial heat even though the flames have died away. Some of these coals need to be preserved. Maintaining a live fire is much easier than starting a new one from scratch, and the settlement will need cooking fires tomorrow and every day going forward. The fire maintenance crew is carefully banking selected fire pits, a process that involves covering the coals with a layer of ash and sand that will limit oxygen flow and cause the coals to burn very slowly throughout the night without extinguishing completely. Come morning, removing the covering layer and adding fresh kindling will cause the banked coals to flame back to life quickly, providing fire for breakfast cooking without requiring the time-consuming process of starting fire from scratch using flint and steel and tinder. Other fire pits are being allowed to die completely, the coals spread out to speed cooling, water poured over them to ensure they're fully extinguished before anyone goes to sleep. Fire safety is critical in a camp where most structures are temporary shelters made from canvas and wood, where a single escaped spark could potentially create a disaster that destroys equipment and injures people. The waste disposal crew has perhaps the least pleasant task of the evening, collecting and properly disposing of all the organic waste generated by feast preparation and consumption. Fish guts and scales, corn husks that are too damaged to be useful, bones from the salt pork, spoiled or damaged food items that aren't fit for human consumption, general refuse and scraps. All of this must be gathered and disposed of properly to prevent attracting animals and to maintain basic sanitation that will protect the settlement's health. The waste is being deposited in a pit that's been dug specifically for this purpose, located downwind of the main settlement area and well away from the river to prevent contaminating the water source. The pit is perhaps 6 feet across and 4 feet deep, dug earlier in the day when the full scope of feast preparations became clear and the need for proper waste disposal became obvious. The waste gets dumped into the pit, then covered with sand that will provide some barrier against odours and insects, then left to decompose naturally over time. You can see men carrying baskets of waste toward the pit, making multiple trips back and forth between the cooking area and the disposal site, their postures suggesting they're not thrilled with this particular duty, but are carrying it out efficiently nonetheless. The work is unglamorous and somewhat disgusting, but it's absolutely necessary for maintaining the camp's sanitation and preventing health problems that could devastate the settlement before it's even properly established. The serving areas where food was distributed during the feast are being cleared and organised by yet another crew. The wooden boards and large leaves that served as serving platters must be collected and either cleaned for future use or disposed of if they're too damaged or contaminated to be worth saving. The areas where people gathered to collect their food must be swept clean of spilled food particles, of dropped items, of the general detritus that accumulates wherever hundreds of people congregate. This crew is working with simple brooms made from bundled plant material, probably assembled quickly earlier today using materials gathered from the forest, sweeping sand and debris into piles, collecting usable items for cleaning and storage, disposing of true waste into the collection baskets that will be carried to the disposal pit. The sweeping motion is rhythmic and somewhat hypnotic to watch. Sweep, 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 create a pile, move to the next area, repeat. The general camp organisation is improving visibly even in the darkness, the chaos of the landing and feast giving way to something more ordered and functional. Supply crates are being arranged in organised rows in designated storage areas, similar items grouped together to make future access easier. Tools are being collected and stored in a designated tool area where they'll be protected from overnight moisture and will be easy to find when tomorrow's work begins. Personal belongings that were dropped randomly during the day's activities are being collected by their owners and stored properly. The beach that this morning was empty and pristine is now clearly inhabited, clearly claimed, clearly in the process of transformation from wilderness to settlement. The transformation is both remarkable and slightly melancholy. Something wild and natural is being domesticated and organised, shaped to human purposes, losing its original character in the process. But this transformation is exactly what colonisation means, exactly what the Spanish expedition came here to accomplish. By the time all the evening tasks are finally complete, full darkness has fallen and the settlement is illuminated primarily by the banked fires that glow gently in various locations, creating small islands of orange light in the surrounding darkness. The ocean is invisible beyond the immediate beach area, though you can still hear the waves rolling in with their eternal rhythm. The forest is a wall of darkness, broken occasionally by the glow of eyes reflecting firelight, animals watching the new human settlement with cautious curiosity or concern. The stars overhead are spectacular beyond anything most of the Spanish colonists have seen before. In Spain, even in rural areas away from major cities, there's usually some ambient light from nearby settlements, some haze in the atmosphere that obscures the fainter stars. But here, far from any European settlement, on a clear September night, in a land with no artificial lighting whatsoever, the stars are brilliantly visible in overwhelming profusion. The Milky Way stretches across the sky like a river of light, so dense with stars that it appears almost solid, almost like a cloud rather than individual points of light. Constellations that you learn to identify during the voyage are clearly visible. Ursa Major and Minor, Cassiopeia, Orion just rising above the eastern horizon. The North Star stands steady in the northern sky, the reliable navigational reference that guided ships across the Atlantic, the fixed point that stays constant while everything else in the heavens slowly wheels around it. You stand for a moment looking up at those stars, thinking about how far you've travelled to reach this beach, about the ocean crossing that brought you thousands of miles from Spain to this Florida shore, about the improbability of your survival and safe arrival given all the dangers faced during 3 months at sea. Those stars are the same stars that shine over Spain, the same heavens that cover the entire world, the same celestial sphere that ancient philosophers thought was solid crystal containing fixed lights. The continuity is comforting. Even though you're far from home in completely unfamiliar territory, the sky remains familiar, providing connection to everything you've known before. Tomás surveys the cleaned and organised cooking area one final time, checking that everything has been done properly, that no task has been overlooked, that tomorrow's work can begin efficiently without having to first deal with yesterday's mess. His expression shows satisfaction with what his crews have accomplished. The feast was successful, feeding was completed without any apparent illnesses or problems, cleanup has been thorough and proper. It's been a long day of incredibly demanding work, but it's been successful work, meaningful work, work that contributed to the settlement's first celebration and to building peaceful relations with native peoples. Good work today, everyone, Tomás says, his voice carrying across the cooking area despite his evident exhaustion. The feast was well prepared, properly served, thoroughly enjoyed by Spanish and Timucua alike. The cleanup has been completed properly, food is stored. For tomorrow, implements are cleaned and ready for next use. You should all be proud of your contributions today. Now go get some sleep. Tomorrow we start the real work of establishing permanent cooking facilities, of creating systems that will sustain this settlement for months and years rather than just for one celebration feast. Rest well, you've earned it. The crews disperse toward their sleeping areas, each person carrying their blankets and personal items, everyone moving with the slow, exhausted gait of people who've worked far beyond their normal limits. You head toward the designated sleeping area for general colonists, your body demanding rest, your mind too tired to process anything complex, your only thought being the desperate need to lie down and stop moving. The day's work is finally, truly complete. America's first Thanksgiving has been celebrated, the landing accomplished, the mass conducted, the feast shared, the cleanup finished. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new work, new steps in the ongoing project of building a settlement that can sustain itself. But tonight is for rest, for sleep, for the peace of honest work honestly accomplished. The sleeping area designated for general colonists is located about 50 yards from the main landing site, positioned to be far enough from the activity areas that noise won't disturb rest, but close enough that people can respond quickly if there's an emergency requiring all hands. The area is simply a section of beach that's been cleared of the worst debris and marked with wooden stakes driven into the sand at the corners, defining the boundaries where perhaps 100 men will sleep tonight. There's no shelter here, no protection from weather, no privacy or comfort beyond what each person brought in their personal bundle. Just open sand under the stars with thin blankets providing minimal cushioning between bodies and ground, with the night air providing the only climate control. In Spain, even the poorest people usually have some form of shelter, a house or cottage or barn, some structure with walls and a roof that provides protection from weather and some degree of warmth and security. But here, in this brand new settlement, where no structures exist yet, everyone sleeps exposed to the elements. The sand is still slightly warm from the day's sun, retaining heat even though the air temperature has dropped with nightfall. You test several spots with your foot, searching for the flattest, softest area you can find, a place with no rocks or shells or other debris that would make sleep uncomfortable. Each potential spot requires evaluation. Is it level, or does it slope slightly in a way that would cause you to roll? Is the sand deep enough to cushion your body, or is it a thin layer over harder packed soil? Are there any obvious lumps or depressions that would create pressure points during the night? You finally select a spot that seems reasonably good by the standards of sleeping. On open beach, relatively flat, reasonably soft, no obvious problems. You spread your thin blanket on the sand, smoothing it carefully to eliminate wrinkles and folds that would become uncomfortable pressure points during hours of lying in one position. The blanket is wool, rough and somewhat scratchy, worn from years of use, and from the months spent as both bedding and pillow during the voyage. It's not much, but it's what you have, and it's better than sleeping directly on sand. Your canvas bundle becomes your pillow, positioned at the head of your sleeping area. You've used this bundle as a pillow every night for 3 months during the voyage, and it's shaped itself somewhat to your head, the contents compressing and forming into a lump that's almost comfortable by the standards of improvised pillows. Everything you own is wrapped in that bundle. Spare clothing, wooden cup and bowl, knife, a few small personal items that have sentimental value even if they have no practical function. Around you, other colonists are similarly arranging their sleeping spots, each person claiming a section of sand roughly 6 feet by 3 feet. Enough space to lie down without touching the person next to you, but not much more than that. The sleeping area is crowded with bodies, men lying side by side in rows that resemble soldiers in formation, everyone positioned to maximise the use of limited space while still allowing each person some minimal personal territory. Juan has selected the spot next to yours, spreading his own blanket and positioning his bundle as pillow. Rodrigo is on the other side, already lying down, his eyes closed, though you doubt he's actually asleep yet. Other men from the cooking crews and work details you've laboured with throughout the day are scattered throughout this sleeping area, a community of exhausted colonists who shared today's extraordinary experiences and who tomorrow will continue the work of building something permanent from this temporary landing. The sounds of the settlement at night are very different from the sounds during the day. The constant activity and conversation and work noise that characterised daylight hours has given way to quieter, more subdued sounds. Distant voices carry from the area where officers and leaders have established their sleeping quarters, probably final discussions about tomorrow's priorities and work assignments. The guards who've been posted at strategic points around the camp's perimeter move occasionally, their footsteps crunching slightly in the sand, their silhouettes visible when they pass in front of the banked fires that provide minimal lighting. The ocean provides constant background sound, waves rolling onto the beach perhaps 60 yards away, a rhythmic susurration that's almost hypnotic in its endless repetition. During the voyage, the sound of water against the ship's hull was chaotic and irregular, changing with every wave, creating unpredictable creaks and groans and crashes that made rest difficult. But this sound is different, peaceful, regular, soothing rather than anxiety-inducing. The waves come in sets of larger and smaller surges, following patterns determined by distant weather and ocean currents, but the overall effect is of steady rhythm rather than random chaos. The forest creates its own symphony of night sounds that's completely foreign to European ears. Insects create the loudest component, a constant chorus of buzzing, clicking, chirping, droning that rises and falls in volume but never completely stops. The insect sounds in Spain are nothing like this, nothing approaching this density or variety or sheer volume of noise. In Florida's warm, humid climate, where insects remain active year-round rather than dying off in winter, the nighttime insect chorus is almost overwhelming, a biological soundtrack that speaks to the incredible diversity and abundance of life in this environment. Birds call occasionally from the forest, night birds hunting or communicating, making sounds that range from melodic hooting to harsh shrieks, to calls that sound almost like human laughter or crying. You don't recognize any of these bird calls from your experience in Spain. The species here are completely different, adapted to different environments and ecological niches, producing sounds that are exotic and sometimes slightly unsettling in their unfamiliarity. Larger animals move through the forest as well, though you hear them more than see them. Rustling and undergrowth suggests something moving through low vegetation. Occasional crashes indicate larger animals, perhaps deer or some other mammal species you've never encountered, travelling through their territory. Once you hear a sound that might be a large cat of some kind, a coughing roar that carries across the distance and makes several colonists sit up nervously, hands moving toward weapons that are never far from reach, even during sleep. But the guards on watch don't react with alarm to these sounds, suggesting that either they're normal and not threatening, or the guards are too exhausted to care about anything that isn't an immediate attack. Probably both. Everyone is so tired that only the most urgent threat would be sufficient to motivate real action. Anything less urgent can wait for tomorrow. You lie on your back looking up at the stars, your hands folded on your chest in a position that's comfortable and somehow naturally reverent. The stars overhead are spectacular beyond anything most of the Spanish colonists have seen before. In Spain, even in rural areas away from major cities, there's usually some ambient light from nearby settlements, some haze in the atmosphere that obscures the fainter stars. But here, far from any European settlement, on a clear September night, in a land with no artificial lighting whatsoever, the stars are brilliantly visible in overwhelming profusion. The Milky Way stretches across the sky like a river of light, so dense with stars that it appears almost solid, almost like a cloud rather than individual points of light. Constellations that you learn to identify during the voyage are clearly visible. Ursa Major and Minor, Cassiopeia, Orion just rising above the eastern horizon. The North Star stands steady in the northern sky, the reliable navigational reference that guided ships across the Atlantic, the fixed point that stays constant while everything else in the heavens slowly wheels around it. Your body is beginning the process of relaxation after 16 or 17 hours of constant activity, muscles slowly releasing tension that's been held since dawn, joints settling into positions that don't require active maintenance, breathing slowing from the rapid pace of exertion to something more suited for rest. But your mind is still somewhat active despite your physical exhaustion, replaying scenes from today's events, processing experiences that were too intense and novel to fully comprehend while they were happening. The landing this morning feels like it happened days ago rather than just this morning. So much has occurred in such a short time that the dawn arrival seems distant and almost dreamlike in memory. You remember the first moment when you stepped from the boat into knee-deep water, when your boots touched sand underwater and you began wading towards shore, when you finally reached dry sand and stood on ground that didn't move. The sensation was extraordinary and strange, your body so accustomed to ship motion that solid ground felt wrong, felt like it was swaying, even though you knew intellectually it was stable. You remember the hours of labour preparing the feast, digging fire pits, hauling water from the river, sorting through beans one by one, carrying load after load of firewood from the forest. The work was tedious and exhausting, but also meaningful in ways that ordinary labour often isn't. You were preparing for something significant, contributing to a celebration that would mark the founding of this settlement. You remember the Timucua arriving from the forest, the moment of tension when everything could have gone wrong, when the peaceful landing could have transformed into violent conflict. You remember Admiral Menendez's calm diplomatic approach, Father Lopez's presentation of the cross, the halting translation that gradually established basic communication. You remember the Timucua's decision to accept the feast invitation, their generous contribution of fresh fish and corn and other foods, their willingness to share cooking knowledge and to participate peacefully in the celebration. You remember the Mass conducted by Father Lopez on the beach, the formal Catholic liturgy celebrated in this wild place, the consecration of bread and wine that Catholic doctrine teaches transforms these ordinary elements into Christ's body and blood. You remember receiving communion, the small wafer of consecrated bread placed on your tongue, the act of faith that Catholics have performed for centuries. You remember the feast itself, the flavours and textures and variety, after months of ship's biscuit and salt pork, the particular sweetness of fresh roasted corn that was revelation, the perfectly cooked fish prepared by both Spanish and Timucua methods, the fresh bread that tasted like luxury. You remember the satisfaction of genuine fullness, of having eaten not just enough to stop hunger, but enough to feel completely satisfied. You remember the shared meal with Timucua guests, the small moments of connection across language barriers and cultural differences, the simple act of offering food and receiving food that created bonds of hospitality and mutual obligation. All of these memories tumble together in your mind, overlapping and mixing, the day's experiences blending into a complex tapestry of sensation and emotion and significance that you lack the energy or mental clarity to fully process. Your consciousness keeps trying to make sense of it all, to understand what today meant and what it portends for the future. But exhaustion keeps interrupting these attempts at analysis, pulling your thoughts away from coherence and toward the fragmented, dreamlike state that precedes sleep. Juan shifts beside you, adjusting his position on his own blanket, the movement causing San to shift slightly with a soft whisper of sound. His voice comes out of the darkness, quiet enough not to disturb colonists who are already asleep, but audible to you lying just a few feet away. You awake still? Barely, you respond, your own voice equally quiet. Too tired to sleep properly. My body wants rest, but my mind keeps going over everything that happened today. Same here. It's been the longest day I can remember. Landing, working all afternoon, preparing the feast, the Timucua arriving, Mass, the feast itself, all the cleanup afterward. It feels like 3 days compressed into one. We were part of something historic today, you say, speaking the thought that's been hovering at the edge of your consciousness all evening. Spanish and native peoples sharing a feast in peace, giving thanks for safe arrival. That seems significant, seems like something that should be remembered. Will it be remembered though, Juan asks? Or will this feast just disappear from history, forgotten while people remember other things that happened later? No way to know, you admit. We can't control what future generations will remember or forget. We can only do what we're here to do, help establish this settlement, build something that lasts, give this expedition its best chance of success. If history remembers us, good. If not, well, we still lived it, we still did the work, and that has to be enough. The conversation lapses into silence, both of you too tired to sustain discussion. The moment feels peaceful, a brief connection between two people who've shared extraordinary experiences and who understand without needing to articulate it that their lives have changed fundamentally today. Somewhere in the officer area, someone is playing a guitar or similar stringed instrument, the music carrying across the quiet settlement. The tune is Spanish, probably a popular song from some region of Spain that the musician learned growing up. The melody simple and somewhat melancholy. The music is played quietly, just loud enough to be heard by those nearby, not loud enough to be intrusive or to prevent sleep. The sound provides a connection to home, a reminder that even here in this wild Florida settlement, Spanish culture and tradition continue. The music continues for perhaps 10 minutes, working through several different tunes, all recognizable Spanish melodies that carry associations of home and memory. Then the music stops, probably because the musician is as exhausted as everyone else. The silence that follows the music feels deeper somehow, more complete, as if the music's cessation removes the last barrier between waking and sleep. Your breathing is slowing further, becoming deeper and more regular, falling into the patterns that characterize the transition between consciousness and sleep. Your body feels heavy against the sand, the thin blanket providing minimal cushioning, but your exhaustion making even this uncomfortable surface seem adequate for rest. Your muscles have released most of their tension, going slack and loose in ways that suggest they have no intention of moving again until morning demands renewed activity. The sounds of the settlement continue to fade as more and more colonists fall asleep. Conversations that were audible a few minutes ago have gone silent. Movement that characterized the past hour has largely ceased. The settlement is transitioning from active community to sleeping camp, from hundreds of individual consciousnesses to a collection of sleeping bodies that will remain largely still until dawn. The guards on watch continue their patrols, moving quietly around the settlement's perimeter, maintaining vigilance even though everyone else is sleeping. You hear one guard pass relatively close to your sleeping area, his footsteps crunching softly in sand, his silhouette visible for a moment against the glow of a banked fire. He's carrying a pike, a long wooden shaft with a steel point, a weapon that's effective against both human and animal threats. His posture suggests alertness despite evident fatigue, shoulders straight, head turning regularly to scan the darkness. The guard passes on, continuing his patrol route, and you let your eyes close. The darkness behind your eyelids is complete and somehow comforting, a retreat from visual stimuli that allows other senses to dominate briefly before sleep claims you entirely. You can still hear the ocean waves, still hear the insect chorus from the forest, still hear occasional sounds from the settlement. But these sounds are becoming less distinct, blending together into undifferentiated background noise that's soothing rather than alerting. Your thoughts are fragmenting, losing their coherence, becoming the disconnected, dreamlike images that characterize the edge of sleep. You see the Timucua leader's face, the intricate tattoos that covered his skin. You see Father Lopez elevating the consecrated host during Mass, the white bread caught in firelight. You see the cooking fires burning brightly during feast preparation. You see Admiral Menendez walking among the colonists. These images fade and shift, transforming into other images that might be memories, or might be imagination, or might be the first stirrings of actual dreams. Your consciousness is slipping away, releasing its grip on waking awareness, surrendering to sleep that your body so desperately needs. The first night in the settlement continues around you as you fall deeper into sleep. The guards maintain their vigil, watching the darkness, keeping the settlement safe. The ocean continues its eternal rhythm, waves rolling up the beach and retreating, never stopping, never varying in their fundamental pattern. The forest holds its mysteries and its inhabitants, the whole ecosystem continuing its ancient patterns. The stars wheel slowly overhead, their apparent motion caused by Earth's rotation, though of course you understand this as the heavens themselves rotating around the fixed Earth. The constellations trace their nightly paths across the sky, rising in the east, climbing to zenith, descending to the west in the same patterns they've followed since creation. This is the first night of America's oldest permanent European settlement. The first night of St. Augustine, though the settlement doesn't have that name yet. The first night following America's first Thanksgiving, though history will forget this feast and remember a later one instead. Your breathing has become deep and even now, the steady rhythm of genuine sleep. Your body has finally convinced your mind to surrender consciousness, to stop processing and analysing and worrying, to simply rest. Your face is relaxed into the neutral expression that characterises deep sleep, free from the tension that characterised your waking hours. Your hands have unclenched, fingers going loose and slightly curled. You're asleep now, deeply asleep, far beyond the light dozing that characterised the first few minutes after lying down. Your consciousness has retreated completely, leaving only the autonomic functions that maintain life. Your heart beats steadily, pumping blood through your exhausted body. Your lungs fill and empty with regular rhythm. Your digestive system works on processing the feast you consumed. Sleep has claimed you completely, as it's claimed most of the settlement around you. St. Augustine sleeps through its first night, the beach quiet except for natural sounds, and the occasional movement of guards on watch. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new work, new steps in the process of transforming temporary landing into permanent settlement. But tonight there's only rest, necessary, restorative rest that will prepare tired bodies and minds for the labour ahead. The forgotten Thanksgiving is complete. The feast has been shared, the work has been done, the first day in the settlement has ended, history has been made. Though history will mostly forget these events, in favour of later narratives that better serve the cultural and religious stories that dominant groups will prefer to tell. But the making of history doesn't require that history remember. The significance of events doesn't depend on whether future generations acknowledge them. Today happened. The landing, the peaceful meeting with Timucua people, the mass on the beach, the shared feast, all of it. The historical record preserves these facts in Father Lopez's diary and Spanish colonial documents, available for anyone who cares to look, maintained in archives that will survive for centuries, even if popular knowledge doesn't incorporate them. St. Augustine endures, the oldest continuously occupied European settlement in the United States, founded on September 8, 1565, 42 years before Jamestown, 56 years before Plymouth. The city exists as living proof that this landing happened, that Spanish colonization succeeded here, that this settlement established roots deep enough to withstand centuries of change and challenge. And you sleep, peaceful and exhausted colonist, part of the beginning, even though the beginning will be forgotten. Participant in history, even though history won't celebrate your participation. Builder of something lasting, even though your name will be erased from the building story. Sleep deeply, rest well. Tomorrow continues the work that began today. The stars continue their wheeling path across the night sky. The ocean continues its ancient rhythm. The forest holds its mysteries. The guards maintain their watch. The banked fires glow softly in the darkness. And America's oldest city sleeps through its first night, unaware that it's making history that will be mostly forgotten, unconcerned with how future generations will or won't remember this beginning. The first Thanksgiving happened here, in St. Augustine, Florida, on September 8, 1565. History just forgot to tell you, but now you know, and knowing, you sleep peacefully through the first night of America's forgotten beginning, through the first night in the settlement that will outlast empires and survive for centuries, through the first night following the Thanksgiving that history erased. Sleep well, colonist. Your work today mattered, even if memory doesn't last. The waves continue their rhythm, the stars continue their journey, the settlement sleeps. And tomorrow is another day, for building, for working, for continuing what was begun today. But tonight is for rest, for sleep, for peace. Sleep well, sleep deeply. The forgotten Thanksgiving happened. You were there, and that's enough. May your sleep be peaceful. May your rest be deep. May your dreams be filled with satisfaction, with hope, with the knowledge that you were there. You participated. You mattered. Good night, colonist. Good night, builder of forgotten history. Good night, participant in America's erased first Thanksgiving. Rest now, sleep now. Let the gentle waves and the distant stars and the soft darkness carry you deeper into peaceful sleep. The work is done. The feast was shared. The history was made. Sleep, rest, peace. Good night.